I woke up on a spring morning in 1995 in a small mountain village. For 3 days I had been unconscious with a fever, but during that time I lived an entire other life, decades in a parallel world. Now I was back, a young man again, but carrying all those years of experience in my head. Looking around my old brick house, everything was familiar. The wooden bed, the paper windows, the cabinets. In the mirror, I saw my young face again. But then I noticed a small photo of my wife, Wang Susu, and my heart grew heavy. Before I passed out, I was a terrible husband. I married a gentle, hard-working woman from a mountain village, but I never appreciated her. I thought I was too good for village life. I wasted our money chasing around with city friends, hanging out in arcades and video halls. I was obsessed with a famous actress and covered our walls with her posters. I treated my wife with cold silence, yelled at her when I couldn't find money, and once even pushed her when she wouldn't give me cash for a festival. I never hit her, but my cruelty was the quiet kind. Ignoring her, looking down on her, making her feel worthless. She would cry alone outside, and the villagers noticed. Word reached her older brother deep in the mountains. He came, beat me up, tore down all the posters, and warned me he'd kill me if I kept mistreating his sister. That beating gave me the fever that knocked me out for 3 days. Now, with a lifetime of wisdom I didn't have before, I saw everything clearly. My wife was kind and beautiful, a gentle woman with a sweet face and honest eyes. My father, a village postman, had raised me alone after my mother disappeared when I was 10. He never scolded me, which only made me worse. Nobody in the village respected me. I was known as a lazy good-for-nothing who couldn't hold a job. That evening, Wang Susu came in carrying a basket of coal for the stove. When she saw me standing there, she flinched and dropped the basket. She was afraid of me. I noticed her hands, cracked and black from hard work. It hit me like a punch. What had I been doing all this time? Why did I treat this good woman so badly? I told her softly to wash her hands with warm water, that I would pick up the coal. She stared at me, shocked. Then she lowered her eyes and started explaining, voice shaking, that she hadn't been the one who called her brother to come beat me. She thought my kindness was just fear of her brother, nothing more. She sat on the doorstep and began to cry, and I stood there, heart full of guilt, unable to find the right words. That evening, while Susu and I stood in awkward silence, someone called out from the gate. It was Wang Laishan, the village chief, an old skinny man everyone called Fifth Uncle. He came to talk about 2 things, the annual tax payment and a land swap between our family and a guy named Chen Erju. Susu was confused. She thought we were swapping land with a different family, one that had good, fertile fields close to the village. Instead, it turned out we were trading for Erju's terrible land at the foot of the mountain, where even grass barely grew. Fifth Uncle showed us a paper slip with both our thumbprints on it. Susu looked at me, pale and shaking, asking how I could trade away our farmland for worthless ground. Then it came back to me. During the New Year temple fair, Erju had taken me out drinking. I was drunk, and he sweet-talked me into agreeing to swap our good land for his bad land, offering 200 yuan per acre as a bonus. That night, he stuffed the signed paper into my pocket. I must have pressed Susu's thumb on it while she was asleep. I felt so ashamed I could barely speak. I wanted to tear that paper up, but I knew better. In a village, pulling tricks like that ruins you forever. And Erju was well-connected in the county. Nobody dared cross him. Our family had no leverage. I was the only son, and nobody in the village even liked me. I told Susu not to cry, promised I'd go to town tomorrow, and talk Erju into canceling the deal. Fifth Uncle sighed and said we should sort it out quickly because the government was coming next month to remeasure all the farmland for new boundary lines. Before he left, Susu stopped him to hand over the tax money. She went inside and pulled a small black wooden box from under my pillow. Inside was a thin stack of bills, just barely enough to cover our taxes. But the moment I saw that box, I froze. It was identical, exactly the same, as a box I had bought in my dream life, in the parallel world, during the Tokyo Olympics on a trip to Japan. Same shape, same color, same everything. My heart was pounding. How could this object from my other life be here, in this world, hidden under my pillow? Was this the connection between the 2 worlds? Was it some kind of gateway? Susu thought I was after the money again and clutched it tight, begging me not to take it. I told her I didn't want the money, just the box. She looked confused, but handed it over and hurried out to pay fifth uncle. Alone with the box, I turned it over in my trembling hands. It was a perfect match. I couldn't help wondering, was this the secret behind my journey to that other world? Could this little box be some kind of moonlight treasure box from the movies? I spent the whole night holding the black wooden box, opening and closing it, trying to make it work again. It was a slim rectangular box with old, detailed patterns carved into it. Honestly, it looked a lot like the moonlight treasure box from the movies. I was sure it was connected to my time travel, but no matter what I did, nothing happened. I barely slept. The next morning I kept fiddling with it, getting more and more frustrated. Susu saw my bad mood and thought I was upset about not finding money inside the box, so she stayed quiet and kept her distance. Then she carefully told me what she'd heard, that Erju wasn't just swapping land with us. He'd been trading and renting land from several families in the village, planning to build greenhouses. I almost laughed out loud. Greenhouses in 1995? From my future memories, I knew a massive flood was coming this year. Our whole county would be hit hard. Erju was going to lose everything. Susu gathered her courage and suggested a plan. Instead of swapping land permanently, we could offer to rent our land to Erju for several years using the money he'd already paid us, so we wouldn't lose ownership. She was so afraid of me that even this reasonable suggestion came out like a plea. But I just said yes. She looked stunned. She couldn't believe I agreed so easily. I went outside to clear my head and fed the chickens. Then I took the box out into the sunlight for a closer look. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. 2 faint characters carved inside the box, one on each half. They were strange, twisted symbols, almost invisible, like ancient script. I stared at them, trying to figure out what they meant, but the longer I looked, the dizzier I got. My vision blurred, and I felt sick to my stomach. Something about those symbols was dangerous to stare at. Right then, fifth uncle came rushing back into our yard with terrible news. Erju had used his connections at the county office to get early approval for his greenhouse project. The government had already classified the swapped land under his name. Our farmland was officially his now. There was no way to reverse the trade. Susu's face went white. I could hear their voices, but my head was spinning from those symbols. The world tilted sideways, and I collapsed on the ground. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was surrounded by thick, white fog. In front of me stood a stone tablet covered in the same twisted writing from inside the box. But now, somehow, I could read it. The first 2 characters were the ones from the box. They meant sun and moon. The full inscription read, Sun Moon Grotto Heaven. I touched the tablet. It felt smooth and warm, like jade. The instant my hand made contact, the fog around me started swirling toward the stone, then rushed straight into my body. The white fog poured into me, and I realized I was in a soul state. No physical body, just spirit. But my soul welcomed the fog like it was thirsty for it. Warmth spread through me, like soaking in a hot spring. When all the fog was absorbed, I felt refreshed and clean, as if years had been washed away. Once the fog cleared, I could see where I was. Behind the stone tablet stretched a lush forest full of strange trees I'd never seen before. A winding path led deeper in. I followed it and found a small thatched hut with a sign that read, Sun Moon Cottage, in that same mysterious script, which I could now somehow understand. Nobody lived there anymore. Inside were just a straw mat, a bamboo bed, a heavy stone hoe, and 2 straw hats. I kept walking along the path until I reached a crystal-clear stream. I scooped up a handful and drank. It was sweet and made my soul feel warm again, though weaker than the fog. Further on, I crossed an old stone bridge over a huge lotus pond, full of green leaves and bright red flowers. The air smelled wonderful. Past the bridge stood an elegant stone pavilion surrounded by exotic flowers and fruit trees, with rainbow-colored light hovering above it. I picked 2 fruits from a tree near the pavilion and took a bite. They were delicious. But then something incredible happened. Right where I'd plucked the fruits, new flower buds appeared, and within seconds they bloomed, grew, and became ripe fruit again before my eyes. I tested everything, different fruit trees, flowers, even lotus roots from the pond. Everything regrew instantly. I ran back to the hut, grabbed the stone hoe, dug holes and planted leftover seeds and cuttings. Seeds sprouted into full fruit trees in moments. Flower cuttings grew into whole blooming plants. This place was like a magic treasure bowl. Everything you took came right back. My mind was racing. Could I bring things from the outside world and grow them here? But then a more urgent thought hit me. How do I get out? The moment I thought, get out, there was a flash of white light, and suddenly I was lying on a hard bed under a thick blanket. The walls around me were black with soot, and there were piles of burned paper ash on the floor near the bed legs. This wasn't my house. And the burned paper, that's what people burn for the dead. Had Susu thought I died? I called out, but nobody answered. I got up and went outside. It was dark, the middle of the night, but strangely I could see clearly. Soon I heard voices and saw a group of villagers coming toward me with a donkey cart, led by Fifth Uncle. They spotted me standing outside and stopped in surprise. Fifth Uncle told me I'd been unconscious for over 10 hours. They were about to take me to the township clinic. He figured I'd fainted from the shock of losing my farmland for good. One of the villagers laughed and said I must have passed out from regret, that I'd traded away good land for just 200 yuan, while other families were getting 100 yuan per acre every year just for renting to Urju. Everyone burst out laughing at my expense. I glanced at the guy mocking me, someone I'd worked with years ago, whose job I'd ruined with my laziness. He had every right to resent me. Fifth Uncle shut him up and sent the group home with the donkey cart, leaving just himself and the village doctor, a man called Guoping. I told them I felt fine and didn't need an exam. The doctor looked me over and agreed my color was good. Then Susu came running up with a bundle of clothes she'd packed for the hospital. When she heard I was okay, she nearly collapsed with relief. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. We walked home in silence. Back inside, she quietly started putting the packed things away. She offered to cook noodles for me, but didn't dare ask why I'd fainted. She'd learned that embarrassing questions made me angry. I told her I wasn't hungry, which was true. Since leaving the grotto, my body felt different. My eyesight was sharper. I could see clearly in the dark, and I wasn't hungry despite not eating all day. Then I noticed something that made my heart ache. Behind her hair, on her temple, was a dark bruise, from the day I'd shoved her during the temple fair and she hit the bed frame. That same night, I'd refused to let her sleep in the bed. I reached out to touch the bruise. She flinched, thinking I was angry again, but I asked softly if it still hurt. She stared at me, completely stunned, her eyes filled with tears. She mumbled something about boiling water for my feet and rushed out, wiping her face. But I caught that flash of surprise and hope in her eyes, and it broke my heart all over again. When she brought the basin, I couldn't hold back anymore. Words weren't enough. I picked her up and carried her to bed. After everything I'd done, promises meant nothing. I had to show her with actions. Later that night, while Susu slept, I kept traveling back and forth between our world and the grotto, testing my theories. First, I brought out a bowl of stream water. In the darkness outside, it glowed faintly, like moonlight on a river. I drank some. It tasted the same, sweet and refreshing, but didn't give the warm feeling it had when I drank it as a soul inside the grotto. Still, after finishing the bowl, my stomach gurgled and oily sweat seeped from my skin, like my body was pushing out impurities. My injuries from the beating hurt less. I felt stronger and more alert. I tried a second bowl. The effect was weaker. A third bowl, even weaker. Apparently, there was a limit. Maybe one bowl a day was all my body could absorb. Next, I tested whether things from the outside could grow in the grotto. I broke off branches from our pear and peach trees, grabbed some peanuts and dried dates from the house, and brought them all inside. I dug small holes with the stone hoe and planted everything. Within seconds, the seeds sprouted, grew, bloomed, and bore fruit. Full-sized pear trees, peach trees, and date trees appeared before my eyes, heavy with ripe fruit. The peanuts spread into a small patch. I was thrilled. This meant I could grow familiar crops in the grotto, things I could actually sell in the real world without raising suspicion. The strange plants already growing inside would be impossible to explain to anyone. I knelt down and grabbed a handful of the soil. It was soft and rich, with a faint pleasant smell I couldn't name. I told myself to be very careful. This grotto was an incredible gift, and I had to keep it secret. But I also noticed one thing. There were no living creatures in the grotto at all. No birds, no insects, no fish. Nothing but plants. Back in the yard, I was about to test whether living creatures could survive in the grotto when I tripped over something. A huge patch of morning glory vines had exploded out of the ground right where I'd dumped that leftover bowl of stream water. The vines were thick as 2 fingers and covered in blue and white flowers. The water from the grotto had triggered dormant seeds in the soil and made them grow instantly. This got me excited. If the water could do this to outside plants, then Urju's worthless wasteland might actually be worth something after all. I ran more tests. I poured 1 bowl of water on a patch of ground near the woodpile. Wild grass shot up waist-high in seconds. But when I poured a 2nd bowl on the same plants, they didn't grow more. Instead, they quickly matured, turned yellow, and dropped seeds. So the water could speed up a plant's entire life cycle, but only 2 bowls worth worked on any given patch outside the grotto. Inside the grotto, there was no limit, but out here the magic was capped. Then I remembered what I'd originally meant to test: living creatures. It was early spring, too cold for insects, so I went to the chicken coop. I grabbed our rooster by the leg before it could make a sound and pulled it into the grotto with me. The bird panicked for a second, then calmed down, flew up onto a tree by the cottage, and crowed proudly. Animals could live inside. That was a relief. By now I'd also figured out how the grotto worked for me. After my first visit, the black box had somehow merged into a spot between my eyebrows. I no longer needed the physical box. I could enter and leave the grotto just by thinking about it. Anything I'd touched inside, I could pull out with a thought. I put the rooster back in the coop and finally went to bed. The next morning, I woke up before Susu. I wanted to do something for her. I replaced the coal in the stove, lit a fire in the yard, and started cooking. I used peanuts, lotus seeds, and red dates from the grotto to make a sweet porridge. The grotto ingredients gave off a strange, wonderful smell that made your mouth water just standing nearby. When Susu came outside and saw me wearing an apron, chopping vegetables, with a pot of porridge bubbling on the stove, she just froze. I smiled and told her to wash her face, that breakfast was almost ready. I set 2 bowls on the stone table and told her to let it cool first. She stood there looking dazed, like she was in a dream. For her, this was something that had only ever happened in dreams. Her husband cooking breakfast and smiling at her. Susu sat down at the stone table and sniffed the porridge. The rich lotus seed fragrance made her perk up right away. Even her tiredness seemed to fade. She asked why I was cooking outside instead of using the stove indoors. I told her I didn't want to wake her up. She bit her lip when she heard that, and I could see something shift behind her eyes, like a crack of sunlight breaking through a wall she'd built around her heart. She tasted the porridge and her eyes lit up. She couldn't stop eating. The scrambled eggs with scallions, the fried peanuts sprinkled with sugar. She tried everything, and her chopsticks barely paused. All the ingredients were from the grotto, including the water I'd used to cook. That's why the food tasted so good. My cooking skills were nothing special. It was the magical ingredients doing the work. When she said the food was delicious and asked where I'd found such amazing lotus seeds, I just smiled and changed the subject. She didn't press it. She ate until her stomach was full and leaned back, rubbing her belly, complaining softly that it was my fault for making food too tasty. She'd never dared talk to me so casually before. The warmth between us this morning had loosened something in her. I told her I'd cook something even better for lunch. She blushed and looked flustered. She wasn't used to hearing kind, ordinary words from me. Already I could see the difference the grotto food was making. Her face, pale and tired when she woke up, was now rosy and bright. Her eyes had more life in them. Even the rooster had gotten a boost. After spending half a day inside the grotto, that bird was chasing every hen around the yard first thing in the morning. I couldn't openly share the grotto's secrets with Susu, so cooking the ingredients into meals was the best way to help her without raising questions. When I started washing the dishes, she jumped up and tried to take over. I told her to sit and digest. She'd eaten too much and cold air on a full stomach would give her trouble. She opened her mouth to argue, but I gently pushed her back onto the bench. She didn't resist, just sat there staring at me with those big eyes, like she still couldn't believe any of this was real. In the morning sunlight, with her dark hair shining and her fair skin glowing, she looked prettier than any movie star I'd ever obsessed over. Until now, what I'd felt toward her was mostly guilt. But in that moment, my heart actually started beating faster. Our quiet moment was broken by the village loudspeaker announcing that all land swaps had to be completed this month. With each repeat of the announcement, Susu's face grew paler. She looked at me like a frightened rabbit again. I told her not to worry, I'd handle it. I was heading to the village office to finalize the land exchange. She panicked and asked why I'd go through with it when Urju's land was useless. She explained that the land used to be a limestone factory. Years ago, an earthquake caused the ground to collapse and buried tons of lime underground. The land had been abandoned for nearly 10 years. Anything planted there died. Even trees the village had put in years ago were still stunted and half dead, their leaves burned yellow by the lime in the soil. The whole area was surrounded by graves. I understood her fear, but I had the grotto now. With that magical water, I could make anything grow anywhere. So I smiled and told her I'd learned methods for turning wasteland into good farmland while I was in the county, which was a total lie, of course. But I also pointed out something true. Wasteland didn't require the annual tax payment, which would save us real money. And we were getting over 30 acres in exchange for our 10, 3 times the land. She bit her lip, unconvinced but unable to argue with my confidence. She sighed as I walked away. On my way to the village office, I overheard people gossiping. That's when I learned that Susu had lied to me the day before. She'd told me several families had swapped land with Urju, but the truth was nobody else had been foolish enough to trade. Everyone else just rented their land to him for 100 yuan per acre per year. I was the only idiot who'd permanently traded good farmland for worthless ground, all for a 200 yuan bribe. Susu had made up the story to soften the blow, knowing my old temper would have exploded at the full truth. I couldn't blame her. She was just trying to protect herself and find a way to fix things. The villagers were talking openly about what a fool I was. Some said they felt sorry for Susu, stuck with a lazy husband like me. Others said my brother-in-law was right to beat me. At the village office, fifth uncle wasn't there yet. I sat and waited about 20 minutes until he showed up with a woman behind him, around 30, well-dressed and attractive. He introduced her as Qin Xiaomei, director of the Township Family Planning Office, staying temporarily at our neighbor Dongmei's house, right across from us. Then I realized I'd already met her. On my first day awake, I'd stumbled outside in just my shorts, confused and disoriented. She'd been carrying a bucket of wastewater, thought I was some kind of pervert, and dumped the whole bucket over my head. Now here she was, an important township official living right across from my door. At the village office, I ran into Qin Xiaomei again. She gave me a cold greeting, not because of the underwear incident, but because the villagers had already told her what kind of man I was. A lazy wife-beater, in their version. I couldn't blame her for the attitude. Fifth uncle assumed I'd come to make trouble about the land swap. He put on a pained face and started explaining how impossible it would be to reverse anything now that the township had stamped the papers. I cut him off and told him I wasn't here to fight it. I was here to finalize the exchange. I wanted it done today. He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. So did Qin Xiaomei. They both looked at me the way you'd look at a fool. Fifth uncle asked if I was sure, if I wouldn't regret it. I told him a real man stands by his word. The truth was, Urju's land was perfect for me. It was over 30 acres, far from the village, hidden near the mountains. The ideal place to secretly use the grotto's magic without anyone noticing. He asked if Susu knew. I said yes, she agreed. He didn't fully believe me. But since the township had already approved everything, there was nothing to argue about. 20 minutes later, the paperwork was done. Walking out, I headed toward the wasteland to see it for myself. The land had been cleared by Urju's father back around 1980, during a government push to develop and used ground. The old man had opened up over 30 acres, then instead of farming it, he built a limestone factory. An earthquake collapsed the site and buried tons of lime underground. Now the son was trying to build greenhouses on rented land nearby, and a flood was coming in a few months that would wipe him out. Father and son, both bold but cursed with terrible luck. Though honestly, neither of them deserved sympathy. Urju had deliberately tricked me into that land swap, taking me drinking and getting me drunk just to grab my well-located farmland near the irrigation pump. But I wasn't going to waste energy on revenge. The flood would take care of him. I had the grotto and bigger plans. I walked past the wheat fields toward the northwest, enjoying the countryside, kids flying kites, green mountains in the distance. But after climbing over a couple of steep hills, I heard screaming. A dead person. There's a dead body in the pit. It was the children. Their faces were white with terror, running toward the road, so scared they'd abandoned their kites. The kids spotted me on the road and ran over, terrified. A boy named Leone, a neighbor's kid, recognized me first. They all started shouting about a dead body behind the old Earth God temple in a tree pit. They described rotten clothes, hair, bones, and something moving underneath. One kid even said the temple door turned into a monster's mouth at night. But the more I listened, the more I doubted it. None of them had actually gone close. They'd just seen something from a distance and scared themselves. I told them to go home and stop running so far from the village without adults. Kidnappings were common in those days, and stolen children almost never came back. After the kids left, I went to check anyway, just to be safe. The temple was a tiny old shrine on a path between the fields, locked up, with a huge pit behind it full of big trees. At night the place looked dark and creepy, which is why parents made up ghost stories to keep children away. I climbed down into the pit and found what the kids had seen. Between two large trees lay a pile of rotten clothing with messy hair and what looked like bones. But something underneath was moving slightly, and I could hear faint whimpering sounds. I carefully pulled the clothes aside and found a dead black dog, already frozen stiff. But her belly was still twitching. Two tiny tails poked out from under her body. She'd given birth before dying, probably from the cold or complications. Underneath were two newborn puppies, one black and one yellow. Eyes still shut, shivering and crawling blindly, looking for milk that would never come. They'd already had diarrhea, which was a bad sign. Experienced people would say puppies in this condition can't survive. But I couldn't leave them. I pulled them into the grotto and carried them to the stream. I dipped my fingers in the magical water and let them lick it, drop by drop. After a few rounds of feeding, the puppies opened their eyes. They nuzzled against me, pushing their little heads into my chest like they were searching for more. I set them down and kept feeding them. Before long, they were running around on wobbly legs, barking with surprisingly strong little voices. I smiled and carried them to the thatched cottage to rest. Then I went back outside, dug a hole with the stone hoe, and buried the mother dog properly. After that, I put the hoe away and continued walking toward the wasteland. I reached the wasteland at the foot of the mountain. It was worse than I expected. The ground was covered in scattered bricks and rubble from the old limestone factory. Wild grass was thin and yellow, not even a single green sprout this spring. The soil surface was loose and dry, but just a few inches down it was rock hard, like hitting stone with the hoe. All that buried lime had sucked every drop of moisture and nutrition out of the earth. But I had a plan. I dug small holes, dropped in peanut seeds, and splashed them with 2 scoops of grotto water. Within minutes, peanut plants pushed through the soil and grew to full maturity right before my eyes. I pulled one up and tasted it. Decent, though nowhere near as good as peanuts grown inside the grotto itself. The soil was too poor for that. Still, it wasn't wasted effort. After the plants grew and died, their roots left behind nutrients from the grotto water, improving the soil. My plan was simple. Plant 1 section each day, harvest it, and gradually transform the whole 30 acres patch by patch. As a bonus, I'd end up with loads of peanuts to sell in the county. I could claim they were greenhouse grown, since nobody around here knew enough about greenhouses to question it. I worked for about 3 hours and finished a full acre. Normally that would take someone an entire day, but the grotto water had been strengthening my body. I felt like I had endless energy. Harvesting was slower. It took until noon to pull up all the peanuts and store them in the grotto. Each acre produced around 600 gene. I planned to do another acre in the afternoon and take a load to sell in town tomorrow. Walking home, I hummed a little song, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in a long while. This simple life, working the land, seeing real results, was exactly what I dreamed about in my other life, but could never have. I got home after 1 o'clock, carrying the 2 puppies from the grotto. They were wide awake now, squirming and trying to climb my shoulders. Susu was sitting in the yard making shoes. When she saw the puppies, her face lit up instantly. She ran over and asked where I'd found them. I told her about the dead mother dog behind the temple. She scooped both puppies into her arms right away, stroking them gently. When I mentioned we could give them away once they got bigger, she clutched them tighter and begged me not to. She'd always wanted dogs, but I'd never allowed it before. Then I told her the land swap was officially done and that I'd visited the wasteland. I said it wasn't as bad as we'd feared, and I'd brought back some soil to show her. I showed Susu 2 small piles of soil I'd brought back, one from the surface and one from deeper down. She knew enough about farming to tell the difference, and she was surprised. The deeper soil was actually not as terrible as she'd expected. I told her to trust me, that I had ways to make things grow there. I winked at her playfully, and she couldn't help laughing. It felt good to see her smile. The two puppies had already bonded with me completely. The moment I walked away, they stumbled after me on their tiny legs, crashed into each other, and started barking in panic when they lost sight of me. Susu found it hilarious. We named the black male one Haiwa and the yellow female one Xiaojing. For lunch, Susu had made steamed buns and scrambled eggs with scallions. I added a pot of dumpling soup using grotto water and spinach I'd quickly grown inside the grotto from seedlings I'd dug up on the way home. The soup turned out incredible, and Susu stuffed herself again. That afternoon, the village loudspeaker announced that the township family planning office would be visiting every household. So we stayed home. Qin Xiaomei came by at dusk with her team, did a quick registration, left 2 boxes of contraceptives, and hurried off. But before leaving, she gave me a look that clearly said, "What a waste of a good woman on a man like him." I was annoyed but couldn't argue. My reputation was that bad. Meanwhile, Susu was happily building a little bed for the puppies. The 2 pups had eaten a bowl of soup at lunch and slept by the stove all afternoon with their round bellies sticking up. Over the next 2 days, I settled into a rhythm. Each day, I went to the wasteland and planted another acre of peanuts using grotto water, then harvested and stored everything in the grotto to dry overnight. The magic soil inside could speed up the drying process based on my intentions, so by morning the peanuts were perfectly dried and ready to sell. I kept cooking all meals with grotto ingredients. Susu ate well, and her face grew rosier by the day. She talked more, smiled more, and started helping me wash dishes after dinner, something I let her do because working side by side brought us closer together. On the 3rd morning, I woke before dawn, made breakfast, and after eating I borrowed Fifth Uncle's donkey cart. I told him I was going to buy farming tools in the county. Really, I was going to sell peanuts at the morning market. I needed the cart as cover. I couldn't exactly walk into town carrying hundreds of pounds of peanuts that appeared from nowhere. What I didn't know was that borrowing the donkey cart had already made me the village joke again. Fifth Uncle's donkey threw a fit that morning, braying and refusing to be harnessed until I fed it some grotto-grown peanuts. The neighbors all came out to see what the noise was about, and when they found out the famous village Lazybones was heading to buy plows to work that hopeless wasteland, they couldn't stop laughing. To them, I was just piling one embarrassment on top of another. I didn't care. They didn't know what I knew. A massive flood was coming in a few months. After the floodwaters washed through, the buried lime would be diluted and the soil transformed. Nobody would question how the wasteland turned into farmland. People around here still believed in fate and miracles. They'd just say heaven finally showed mercy. I drove the cart east past the reservoir and around 2 ridges until the county town came into view. At a quiet spot on the road, I pulled over and transferred the dried peanuts from the grotto onto the cart, about 500 or 600 gene, a full load. I cracked a couple open to check. Perfectly dry, just right for selling. At the county agricultural market, I paid half a yuan for a temporary stall fee and drove toward the grain section. The vegetable sellers were mostly gone by now, but breakfast stalls were still going strong. The smell of fried dough sticks, and especially the local buckwheat noodles in red chili oil, nearly broke my resolve. That taste was something I'd missed for decades in my other life. Before I could order a bowl, someone stopped behind my cart. A tall man in his 40s, slightly hunched, was staring at my peanuts in surprise. Next to him stood an elegant woman about the same age, wearing a red scarf and brown wool coat with curled hair and leather boots. Very stylish for 1995 out here. The man couldn't believe fresh peanuts existed this time of year. I told them they were greenhouse grown, just harvested and dried. They each tried some and exchanged impressed looks. The taste was clearly better than ordinary peanuts. They weren't buyers, just passing through. The woman mentioned she was surprised to see greenhouse farming in her hometown, which told me they were visitors from somewhere bigger. Before leaving, she handed me 2 business cards with a warm smile, saying I could contact her or her husband if I ever needed help. Her card read, Liang Hongyu, with a phone number and address. His said, Qin Rongxian, with just a phone number. Watching them walk away, I could tell she was the one in charge, a capable, confident woman. Her husband treated her with a kind of respectful deference. She seemed like the type who wanted to support development back home. I tucked the cards away and got back to business. I had peanuts to sell. At the market, I parked the cart in the grain section and started hollering about fresh greenhouse peanuts. People came over right away. Everyone was curious because new peanuts in early March was unheard of. They asked a million questions about greenhouses and farming. They all tried samples and agreed the taste was better than normal peanuts. But they bought small, 2 pounds here, 5 pounds there. By 11 o'clock, I'd been shouting all morning and still had about 80 jean left on the cart. I'd priced them at 9 mao per jean, just 1 mao above market price for last year's peanuts. And even that small markup slowed things down. I was disappointed. I had over 2,000 jean total from 3 acres, and at this pace, it would take days to sell everything. I stopped for lunch and finally got that bowl of buckwheat noodles I'd been craving, red chili oil, pork sauce, steaming hot. Worth every fun. After eating, I fed and watered the donkey, then tried a different approach. Instead of the retail market, I drove around to the county's oil pressing shops. That changed everything. The very first small oil press I visited took 300 jean on the spot. The owner tested the peanuts, confirmed they were fresh and dry enough to press immediately, and told me to come back with more if the oil yield was good. I'd been making a rookie mistake all morning. Oil shops served restaurants, supply cooperatives, and grocery stores. Their volume was 10 times what a regular grain shop sold to individual customers. Plus, they made extra money selling the leftover peanut cake to feed mills. Once I understood this, I hit every oil press in town. By late afternoon, I'd moved over 1,000 jean to the presses, plus what I'd sold at the morning market, around 1,500 jean total. I counted my stack of blue bills and felt pretty good. Once these shops tested the oil yield, I'd have steady buyers. If the county market got saturated, I could always try the township presses or neighboring counties. With the remaining money, I bought a plow, a harrow, and bags of various vegetable and crop seeds. On my way out of town, I ran into the couple from the morning, Liang Hongyu and Qin Rongxian, sitting on little folding stools by the river, fishing in the cold. She waved and asked if I'd sold everything. Her husband was curious why I'd chosen to grow peanuts in a greenhouse instead of vegetables or fruit. I made up a story about having leftover space after planting other crops and just tossing in some peanut seeds to fill it. Mr. Qin asked what else I was growing in my greenhouse. Without thinking too hard, I rattled off all the seeds I'd just bought: tomatoes, green beans, cucumbers, eggplant, peppers, garlic sprouts, watermelon, grapes, honeydew, cantaloupe. His jaw dropped. He asked how big my greenhouse was and how my family managed all that. I just shrugged and said it was my first year. I was planting small amounts of everything to see what sold best. When they asked where I was from, I panicked a little and picked the most remote township I could think of, Fonglei Town, Baiyun Valley. Bad luck. Liang Hongyu's face lit up. She'd been sent there during her youth in the countryside movement and still knew people in the area. She called us half-neighbors and got emotional, asking about the old ancestral hall and a temple on the mountain. I cobbled together what little this body's memories held about the place. She squeezed her husband's hand with tears in her eyes, talking about wanting to go back and visit. Something about these two struck me as odd. Mr. Qin treated his wife with extreme deference, calling her you in the formal way, like a secretary addressing a boss rather than a husband talking to his wife. Whatever her background was, she clearly carried serious weight. While we chatted, a fishing rod suddenly bent hard. Something big had taken the bait. Mr. Qin struggled with it, so I stepped in. It wasn't a fish. It was a huge old turtle, nearly the size of a wok, probably 8 or 9 jean. This early in spring, turtles were still sluggish from winter and hungry, which made them easier to catch. Mrs. Liang insisted I take the turtle home. She said they wouldn't know how to cook it, and it was too heavy for them to carry anyway. I tried to refuse, but she wouldn't hear of it. Said we were practically neighbors, and there was no need to be polite. I gave in and loaded it onto the donkey cart. Before leaving, I handed them a bag of peanuts and told them fresh ones were best boiled. I said goodbye and headed home, wondering who these two really were. Once I was out of town and alone on the mountain road, I brought the old turtle into the grotto. The moment she entered, she perked up. Turtles love warmth, and the grotto's mild climate was perfect. I checked her over. Round shell, short tail, a female. Good. I could find her a male later and let them breed. Behind the cottage, I dug a square pit about 3 feet wide with the stone hoe, filled it with stream water, and dropped her in. She sank down happily, eyes half closed, bubbling contentedly with just her head poking above the surface. As I drove along the reservoir, I started planning ahead. When the weather warmed up, I'd get fish fry and raise them in the grotto too. I could dig a bigger pond, maybe even grow lotus flowers on the wasteland once the soil improved. Something pretty for Susu to enjoy, since she couldn't see what was inside the grotto. I also thought about the beautiful lotus pond already inside the grotto. I decided not to put any animals in it for now. That water was our drinking supply. The last thing I wanted was a turtle fouling it up. By the time I reached the village, the sun was setting and smoke rose from every chimney. My cart held the farm tools I'd bought, plus bundles of fresh greens and bags of peanuts I'd pulled from the grotto, disguised as things purchased in town. I also had a big slab of pork. I wanted to cook Susu a proper meal tonight. Near the house, I found a bunch of neighborhood kids crowded around our gate, trying to peek inside. They wanted to see the puppies. Susu had let them in earlier, but Haiwa and Xiaojin were scared of strangers and hid under the bed. The kids begged me to bring the dogs out since they'd heard the puppies only listen to me. I told them to wait while I parked the cart in the back courtyard, my father's old quarters, now used for storage, with a cellar, a wine pit, coal, and plenty of room for the donkey cart. Then I waved the kids inside, and the whole group cheered. Susu followed behind us, watching me joke with the children, carrying groceries into the house. She had a quiet smile on her face. Later she told me that even if the wasteland never grew a single thing, as long as I stayed like this, it would be enough. Back home, I called out for the puppies, and they came scrambling out from under the door curtain, barking and wagging their tails, tumbling over the threshold to reach me. The neighborhood kids watched in amazement as Haiwa and Xiaojin crawled all over me, nuzzling into my chest looking for food. One kid announced that the puppies thought I was their mother. Another said they were trying to nurse from me. My face went dark, but Susu burst out laughing behind me. I called Susu over to feed the dogs. She froze. She was holding a wine jar and had no idea where to get milk. I explained that the jar actually held goat's milk I'd bought in town. I'd found a family with a nursing goat at one of the oil presses and bought over a jean of fresh milk, then split it into 2 jars mixed with grotto water. The puppies were too young for regular food. They needed milk for at least another 2 or 3 weeks. Susu blushed when she realized she'd assumed it was liquor. When she opened the jar, the milk smelled surprisingly good. No goaty smell at all, just a pleasant sweetness from the grotto water mixed in. She poured a small bowl and set it in front of the puppies. They sniffed it, licked once, then buried their faces in the bowl and drank it all in seconds, licking the bowl clean. The kids watched in total silence, barely breathing, fascinated. Then little Leonie begged me to pour another bowl. I told him to get home before dark or his dad would beat him. He grinned and said his dad had gone up the mountain and wouldn't be home for a couple of days. That caught my attention. I asked what his father was doing up there. Hunting, the kids said. Hunting surprised me. Spring plowing was about to start, and every family needed their men home for the land redistribution. But Leonie explained that his family hadn't eaten meat all winter. His 5th sister had exams coming up, and their father wanted her to have a few good meals before going back to school. So he'd gone into the mountains alone yesterday after lunch. Susu mentioned that Leonie's father, Wang Lixian, used to be a great hunter. Rabbits, pheasants, he could catch anything. But with so many kids to feed, he'd been doing factory work for years and hadn't been up the mountain in a long time. Meanwhile, Haiwa and Xiaojin were causing trouble. After finishing their bowl of goat milk, they tried climbing the jar for more. When Susu pulled them away, they started barking and biting at her pants. I walked over and flicked each of them on the head, scolding them for being ungrateful. Instantly, they went quiet, tucked their tails, and crept over to me with sad little whimpers, pressing against my legs like they were begging forgiveness. Susu was amazed. Puppies this young shouldn't understand words like that. I suspected the grotto water was making them smarter. After Susu gently told them it was okay and petted their heads, they rolled over to play with her, then trotted back to me with completely different body language, soft eyes, gentle whines. The contrast was startling. These were not normal puppies. Of course, the kids just kept saying the dogs thought I was their mama. I finally shooed them all home before dark. As Leonie was leaving, I remembered his family's situation. I cut off a chunk of the pork I'd bought and wrapped it up for him, telling him it was for his sister to eat before her exams. The boy refused at first, Said his dad taught him never to take free things because they're the hardest to pay back. Stubborn kid. I told him I'd need his help with something soon, so it wasn't free. That convinced him. He puffed out his chest, promised he'd do a great job at whatever I needed, and ran off with the meat. I told Susu that Leonie's father had helped us during our wedding, and now his family was struggling. Too many children, a bad back from factory work. We should help where we could. She looked at me quietly for a few seconds, then softly said yes. I asked Susu to cut the meat and wash the vegetables while I made a quick trip to Fifth Uncle's house. She didn't ask questions, just wanted to get me a flashlight since it was dark out. The village at night was pitch black, barely anyone used electric lights. Most families were too frugal, and the power supply was poor anyway, which was exactly why they were building new high-voltage lines this year. I walked through the darkness to Fifth Uncle's place and found the whole family eating dinner by kerosene lamp in the yard. I told Fifth Uncle I needed the donkey cart for 2 more days. His wife frowned and his daughters-in-law rolled their eyes, but Fifth Uncle just shrugged and said I could keep it since spring plowing hadn't started yet. He asked if I was planning to plow the wasteland. I said no, I just needed to haul some things from the county. Then I pulled out what I'd brought, a bundle of fresh green beans, a bundle of eggplants, and a bag of peanuts. The whole family stared. Fresh green beans and eggplants in early March. That was unheard of. I explained they were greenhouse-grown, bought in the county. Actually, I'd secretly grown them with grotto water on the roadside before entering the village. They were only slightly better than normal vegetables, not the premium grotto interior quality I kept for Susu and myself. Fifth Uncle's wife, who'd barely acknowledged me earlier, suddenly came over and grabbed both vegetable bundles with both hands, asking how much greenhouse vegetables cost these days. She didn't even glance at the peanuts. In her mind, out-of-season vegetables were far more valuable. I found it amusing. As I left, Fifth Uncle walked me to the gate. After I disappeared down the road, I heard him mutter to his family that maybe I was actually up to something real this time. His wife spat and called me a lazy good-for-nothing. But Fifth Uncle seemed less sure. Back home, Susu had everything prepped and waiting. She asked about the vegetables too, where fresh eggplants came from in winter. I explained about greenhouses, how they kept things warm like spring all year round, growing summer fruits and vegetables even in the coldest months. Her eyes went wide. She asked shyly if the vegetables had cost a lot of money. I called her my little accountant and pinched her nose. She blushed so hard she couldn't look at me and bent over the iron pan pretending to scrub it. That evening, I handed Susu a thick stack of money. She stared at it, completely stunned, not because of the amount, but because I was giving her money instead of demanding it. I told her it was 2,000 yuan, the compensation from the land swap. She should keep it safe. She asked if I needed any for my trip to the county tomorrow. I said I had enough on me. Actually, half the stack was peanut money, because the original 2,000 from Urju had already been half wasted by my old self in less than 2 weeks. In 1995, a mountain family could live an entire year on 1,000 yuan. No wonder people called me a wastrel. Susu took the money inside, and I could see her shoulders finally relax. That night felt like the first time she truly believed things might be different. The next morning I walked out to the wasteland at dawn, taking my time since I didn't need to rush to market. Today I'd just deliver peanuts directly to the oil presses. On the way I passed Fifth Uncle's eldest son, a township police officer coming home from night shift on his bicycle. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. The village lazybones heading to the fields at sunrise. At the wasteland, I noticed something important. The 5 acres where I'd planted peanuts a few days ago had tiny green grass shoots poking through the soil. The grotto water residue was still active enough to trigger dormant seeds in the ground. They were small, barely visible, but if I'd used more water, the grass could have been waist-high by now. That would have been impossible to explain. I reminded myself to dilute the grotto water with regular water from now on. I tested the deeper soil with the hoe. Where I'd already grown 1 round of peanuts, the hard layer underneath had softened significantly. A couple more rounds of planting and plowing, and this land could become real farmland. I estimated the whole 30 acres could be transformed within the month. I got to work, digging, planting peanuts with carefully measured drops of water, harvesting 2 hours later. After several days of this routine, I'd gotten efficient and strong. Half an acre took me just 2 hours, start to finish. Then I tried vegetables. Inside the grotto, Everything I'd planted from the seeds I bought in town had already gone wild. Cucumbers, eggplants, green beans, tomatoes, all bursting with fruit, vines bending under the weight. The spinach had already gone to seed. I collected those seeds and brought them outside to plant in the wasteland. Spinach, eggplant, and cucumber, about 1/10 of an acre total. Everything grew well with the grotto water, though not as spectacular as inside the grotto itself. I bit into a fresh cucumber right off the vine. Crisp, fragrant, much better than any ordinary greenhouse cucumber. I stretched, put the hoe away, and headed home for breakfast. I got home around 9 after working in the fields. Susu was laying out bamboo trays of dried sweet potato slices and herbs to sun-dry in the yard. She told me we were out of white flour and the cornmeal had been ruined by mice, so breakfast would be sweet potato porridge. I told her I'd buy flour bags next time I went to town. While she cooked on the indoor stove, I snuck in some grotto water. Over the past few days, I'd figured out the rules. A person could benefit from about 1.5 bowls of grotto water per day, roughly 2 liters. I'd been using it in every meal, and the change in Susu was visible. Her skin glowed, her eyes were brighter, and sometimes when I glanced at her, my heart would skip. Then I noticed the puppies were missing. Not in their bed, not in the yard. Susu suggested they might have followed me out the gate when I left for the fields that morning. I was about to go look for them when I heard yelping outside and a woman's angry voice. I rushed out. Across the narrow lane, our neighbor, Qin Dongmei, was kicking Haiwa and Xiaojin out of her yard, hard. Each kick sent the tiny puppies tumbling 2 meters through the air, crying in pain. Susu ran over begging her to stop, explaining they were our dogs. Dongmei didn't care. She said the filthy mutts had gotten into her chicken coop and she'd kill them next time. Susu tried to argue, but Dongmei was a nasty bully, sharp-tongued and mean. She sneered that she'd drown the dogs in the outhouse pit. Susu was shaking, close to tears, no match for this woman's viciousness. I'd been watching with a cold face since the kicking started. When Dongmei threatened to drown our puppies and mocked me as a useless nobody, I stepped forward, grabbed her by the neck with one hand, and lifted her off the ground like a chicken. I carried her to the edge of her own outhouse pit and shoved her face down toward the black sewage until her nose nearly touched the surface. The stench made her gag, snot and tears streaming down her face. Susu pulled at my arm, begging me to stop, but I could see the old fear in her eyes. She was remembering the angry man I used to be. That look softened me. I sighed and let the woman go. Dongmei collapsed on the ground, retching and coughing. Between heaves, she screamed that her husband Wang Chunyuan would make me pay. I ignored her and walked Susu back to our yard, but at the door I turned and said one last thing. She could curse me all she wanted. I didn't care. But if she ever opened her mouth against my wife again, I'd throw her in that pit face first, and her husband being there wouldn't stop me. Dongmei didn't dare say anything more to my face, but the hatred in her eyes was unmistakable. Her sister Qin Xiaomei came out looking pale and weak, wrapped in a thick coat, asking what the shouting was about. Dongmei brushed it off and didn't mention what I'd actually done to her. She was too proud to admit it, especially in front of her more successful older sister. Back inside, Susu was worried. She reminded me that Dongmei's sister ran the township family planning office and her husband worked at the township clinic. They had connections and could make trouble for us. I told her it was nothing serious and not to worry. But her concern was real. She'd seen how someone had gotten Erju arrested years ago by pulling strings behind the scenes. Still, underneath the worry, I could tell she felt something new. This was the first time her husband had ever stood up for her. She warned me not to actually hit anyone. She didn't want me getting locked up. I promised I'd be careful. At breakfast, Susu noticed the sweet potato porridge tasted unusually good. I'd added grotto water while she wasn't looking. Meanwhile, I fed the puppies their goat milk myself. After the kicking, Haiwa and Xiaojin were too shaken to let anyone but me touch them. I mixed the mouse-ruined cornmeal with bran and chopped grotto-grown peanut vines for the chickens. The rooster and hens fought over it. The grotto-grown feed was irresistible to them. After breakfast, I hitched the donkey cart and headed to town again. Once past the reservoir and out of sight, I loaded up the cart with dried peanuts from the grotto. The spring weather was beautiful, warm sun, birds singing everywhere, wild rabbits darting through the bushes. I sat on the cart singing folk songs, feeling genuinely happy. My plan was to sell the peanuts to the oil presses, then spend the afternoon fishing by the river. Maybe catch another turtle for the grotto. At the first oil press, the owner, a stocky, round-faced man named Lu Xinging, greeted me warmly. He said my peanuts had tested well for oil yield, and he wanted to buy the whole cartload at 9 mao per jean. But I'd kept this batch in the grotto an extra 2 days, and the quality was even better than before. I told him to inspect the goods first before we talked price. I wanted to push for a better deal. I knew every oil press in town was running low on peanut stock and wouldn't be able to hold out until the autumn harvest. At the oil press, Lu Xinging tasted the new batch and his eyebrows went up, even better than last time. He offered to raise the price by 5 fun to 95 fun per jean. I shook my head. I told him this quality was at least 2 grades above normal peanuts, and 5 fun wasn't enough. I asked for 1 yuan 10 fun per jean. He pushed back hard, saying that price was unheard of even in the city. But I knew his real secret. My peanuts didn't just yield good oil, they produced oil that tasted noticeably better. He'd already used it at home that morning, and his family had wiped the plates clean. I also promised him year-round supply, as much as he wanted, anytime. That was my leverage. After some back and forth, he bit down and agreed. 1 yuan 10 fun. He ordered 3,000 jean on the spot. I spent the morning hauling 5 cartloads back and forth. By early afternoon, the deal was done. 3,300 yuan in my pocket. He also gave me 2 jars of oil pressed from my previous batch and 2 more jars of goat milk. I treated myself to lunch at a decent restaurant. 2 liang of liquor, some pork liver, and hand-pulled noodles. After eating, I bought a fishing rod at a department store, planning to try my luck at the river south of town. That's when I heard a motorcycle pull up behind me. It was Chun Erju, the man who'd tricked me into swapping my farmland. First time I'd seen him since waking up. He was riding a jialing motorcycle with a woman clinging to his waist, Sun Yanhong. His mistress, a heavily made-up older woman who ran a trucking company in town. Her brother was a powerful local figure and one of Erju's main backers. Erju laughed and asked why I was driving a donkey cart around the county. He bragged about having trucks available through Red Sister anytime I needed. Then he got to the point. His greenhouses were about to start construction in a few days, and he wanted me to come help with the labor. I smiled and played along. But inside I was thinking about the flood coming in a few months that would wash all his grand plans away. Erju wanted me to help build his greenhouses and guard the construction site at night. Basically free labor. He dangled the same old carrot. Once the greenhouses were done, he'd get me a job at the sand quarry. He even suggested I sleep in a tent on the field so I wouldn't have to go home to my nagging wife. I almost laughed. This was exactly how he'd manipulated the old me, waving the quarry job like a golden ticket while getting me to do whatever he wanted. The old Chenling had idolized Erju's lifestyle, a rich older girlfriend, an easy position at the quarry, nights at dance halls, and fancy restaurants. To my younger self, that looked like success. In reality, quarry workers were treated little better than indentured laborers, but I'd been too naive to see it. I played dumb. I sighed heavily and told him I couldn't help right now. My wife's family had caused trouble. Things were messy at home. I was stressed. I laid it on thick. Erju got irritated and accused me of holding a grudge because he hadn't gotten me into the quarry yet. He launched into a new promise. Some old guy who operated a sand barge was retiring soon, and Erju swore he'd slot me into that position. I didn't take his bait. Instead, I turned it around on him. I told him we were family, that I'd always trusted him completely, and asked if he really thought I was the petty type. This caught him off guard. He'd been ready to argue, but my sweet talk jammed up his whole approach. He stammered and backtracked, saying he felt guilty for not helping me sooner. I kept the act going, sighed again about how much better quarry life was compared to farming, asked him to please keep me in mind for that position, said I'd thank him properly someday. Every sentence sounded grateful and eager, but not a single word committed me to anything. After I drove off, I could imagine the scene behind me. Sure enough, his girlfriend Sun Yanhong had been watching the whole exchange silently. She probably told him straight. That kid just talked circles around you, said 100 nice things, and agreed to absolutely nothing. Erju must have stood there realizing he'd been handled, and not understanding when the village fool had learned to be so slippery. Behind me, Erju and his girlfriend were probably still fuming. Sun Yanhong had noticed right away that I hadn't fawned over her the way I used to. The old me would have been tripping over himself to impress her, hoping she'd put in a good word for me. This time I barely looked at her. That small change alone told them something was different. Urju was cursing about losing his free labor for the greenhouse construction. Now he'd have to actually pay someone. But I'd already forgotten about them. I drove the donkey cart to the south bank of the Sandy River around 4 in the afternoon. Not a soul in sight. I parked under a willow tree and walked to the water with my new fishing rod and a bucket. A flock of ducks burst out of the dry reeds and splashed into the river, quacking loudly as they paddled away. I sat on a big rock and baited my hook with a special mix: bean cake and wheat bran soaked overnight in grotto water. Amazing stuff. But 20 minutes passed, and I caught nothing but tiny fish. The ducks must have scared everything away. I was about to move spots when I noticed something in the reeds where the ducks had been: eggs. Lots of them. I counted 11 in the first cluster, still warm. As I walked along the bank, I kept finding more, scattered through the reeds. By the time I was done, I had a full basket of nearly 40 duck eggs. Someone's flock had been laying out here regularly, and nobody was collecting them. A nice bonus, even if the fishing failed. I picked a new spot further down and cast my line again. This time, within 2 minutes of the hook hitting the water, the surface in front of me erupted. Fish came swarming from every direction, fighting over the grotto water bait. The water churned and splashed like it was boiling. The bait was stripped off my hook instantly. I put the rod away. This was beyond fishing. I just mixed up the rest of my bait, tossed handfuls into the water, and scooped fish straight into my bucket while they crowded around in a frenzy. Some stuck their heads above the surface begging for more. Others leaped completely out of the water. Not a single fish tried to escape. It was like they were lining up to jump into my bucket. I laughed out loud. Once I got these fish into the grotto, they'd have all the food they could ever want. I carried the full bucket of fish into the grotto. The moment they entered, the fish went crazy, thrashing and leaping, sensing something special about this place. A few big grass carp jumped right out of the bucket onto the ground. Before I could pick them up, the old turtle surfaced from her little pool, snatched one in her jaws, and dragged it underwater. Blood swirled through the water as she ate. I tossed the rest of the escaped fish into her pool. She grabbed another immediately, while the others scattered in panic. I dug a new pond with the stone hoe. About half an hour's work, filled it with stream water, and released all the remaining fish: carp, crucian carp, grass carp, eels, little loaches, about 150 in total. I planted lotus in the new pond too, giving the fish places to hide from the turtle. When I finished, I stood back with my hoe and admired the scene. It was really starting to feel like a proper little paradise. Back outside, I drove past the sand quarry before heading home. Young workers were heading out to drink. Managers lounged in chairs listening to radios. I could see why the old me had been seduced by this life. It looked easy and glamorous compared to farming. I also spotted 2 old men herding a big flock of ducks near the quarry. So that's whose ducks had been laying eggs by the river, the quarry's flock. I glanced at my basket of nearly 40 eggs and grinned. On the way home, I stopped at the flour mill for several big bags of flour, then arranged some cucumbers, tomatoes, and fish on the cart as cover for the grotto goods. That evening, I'd barely gotten inside with the fish and vegetables when someone called at the gate. It was Wang Juxing, 5th uncle's eldest son, the township police officer. This was unusual. He was educated, kept to himself, and almost never visited anyone. He came in carrying a basket covered with blue cloth and explained why he was there. His wife had trouble producing breast milk after their second child. The baby was thin and weak on formula. Yesterday, after eating the peanuts I'd given his father, his wife suddenly started producing milk. It soaked through her clothes and bedding. They'd tried medicines and folk remedies for months with no results, but my greenhouse peanuts had done what nothing else could. He wanted to trade a basket of eggs for more peanuts. I pushed the eggs back and filled a big sack with peanuts for him. I told him not to worry about payment. His wife needed to eat well for the baby's sake. Susu backed me up, saying neighbors shouldn't keep score like that. I was surprised myself. These peanuts were only grown outside with diluted grotto water, not even the premium stuff from inside the grotto. But apparently even that trace of magic was enough to have real medicinal effects. Juxing insisted on leaving the eggs, saying it wasn't right to take expensive greenhouse peanuts for free. I told him if we kept score on everything, I'd be too embarrassed to borrow his family's donkey cart anymore. That stumped him. He finally gave in and put the eggs aside. He offered to help me plow the wasteland since he had some free days this half of the month. I accepted. In village life, favors go back and forth, and that's how you build real friendships. We chatted for a while until it got dark. As Juxing was leaving with the peanut sack, Haiwa and Xiaojin suddenly charged out of their dog bed and started barking at him. Then, in perfect teamwork, they grabbed the corner of the peanut bag with their teeth and tried to drag it back inside, little bottoms in the air, pulling with all their strength. Juxing was amazed. He said puppies this young guarding food like that was extraordinary. They'd make fantastic watchdogs. He looked them over and guessed they might be Huda Huang, a famous local hunting breed from our border region, known for loyalty and fierceness. Pure ones were either solid black or solid yellow, exactly like our two. I laughed and said I didn't care about the breed. Susu liked dogs, so we'd keep them. She smiled sweetly at me while holding both puppies in her arms. Juxing noticed something between us. He stared for a moment, couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something about the way we acted together seemed off from what he'd expected. When he got home, he told his wife that Susu and I seemed like a loving couple, nothing like the village gossip described. His wife Xiaoling scoffed, said a leopard doesn't change its spots, that my father had been fooled by my mother his whole life, and I was just putting on an act. She did admit the peanuts had worked miracles for her milk, though. Apparently Fifth Uncle's wife had kept most of the vegetables I'd given them for the younger son's family, and only reluctantly passed the peanuts along to Juxing's household. Family politics, even in the village chief's house. That evening, I cooked 3 dishes: cucumber with eggs, sweet and sour fish, and braised pork strips. The pork was ordinary, but fried in the oil Lu Xinging had pressed from my peanuts. Even plain meat tasted incredible. I ate 5 big steamed buns plus most of the leftovers. Susu was shocked. She put her hand on my stomach and found it wasn't even bloated. The grotto had been changing my body without me fully realizing it. She was changing too, just more slowly. That night, Susu was washing up and complained about sweating constantly. I joked about the warm weather, forgetting she was on her monthly cycle. She blushed and scolded me for forgetting. Then I offered to help wash her back. The next morning it rained. I held Susu in bed and told her to sleep in. Rainy days were made for that. The rain lasted 2 days. We stayed home, cozy and warm, listening to it patter on the roof. When it finally cleared, just before the spring equinox, the world had transformed. Grass sprouted along the south wall, the peach and pear trees budded, and Susu's potted begonias swelled with flower buds. Spring had arrived. For lunch, I made fish stew again. Small fish from the grotto cooked in a pot with flatbread stuck around the rim to soak up the broth. I'd made it once during the rain, and Susu had loved it so much she asked for it again. The fish were just finger length, from the bucket I'd left in the back courtyard as cover. Susu never questioned where they came from. While we waited for the bread to cook through, I could hear Dongmei outside our gate, clipping buds from the Chinese tune tree. Her little daughter smelled our cooking and said it smelled wonderful. Dongmei exploded, dragged the girl home by her collar, cursing about how we ate fish and meat every day like city people and would soon have nothing left. She slapped the child several times. Her sister Chiomei rushed out and pulled the crying girl away, scolding Dongmei for taking her anger out on a child. The yelling and crying carried right into our yard. I had no idea what set her off this time. Susu quietly explained. Dongmei's husband hadn't come home in 2 weeks, not even during the rain. Village women were gossiping that he was keeping another woman. Dongmei must have heard the rumors and was taking out her fury on everyone around her. I told Susu that Dongmei's husband troubles had nothing to do with us. The woman just couldn't stand seeing anyone else happy. Then I blew on a piece of hot fish and held it out for Susu to taste. Her eyes lit up, even better than last time. The fish had spent 2 extra days in the grotto, which made the flesh richer and more tender. We had a warm, peaceful lunch together, completely unbothered by the noise across the lane. Afterward, I hitched the donkey cart. Today was for plowing, not selling. The rain had softened the ground nicely, perfect timing to turn the soil on that wasteland. 2 rounds of peanut planting had already loosened the upper layer, but the deeper earth was still rock hard from years of lime bonding with the soil. Susu climbed onto the cart with Haiwa and Xiaojin tucked in her arms. She insisted I hold one while she held the other. I laughed and took Haiwa in one arm, steering the donkey with the other hand. Xiaojin squirmed and barked, jealous of her brother being in my lap. Susu giggled the whole way. The villagers stared as we passed through. They couldn't believe it. The famous Lazybones taking his wife to the fields, both of them laughing and happy. Some said I must have been hexed. Others said the beating from my brother-in-law had finally knocked sense into me. But mostly they mocked the idea of plowing that worthless wasteland. Past the village, the countryside was alive after the rain. Green wheat, sprouting grass, fresh mud smell in the air. Susu suddenly pointed and squealed, two wild rabbits chasing each other on a ridge. I watched them for a moment, then realized they weren't fighting, they were mating. I covered the puppy's eyes and joked that it wasn't appropriate for children. Susu turned bright red when she understood and pinched my ear. We rode on, holding hands, teasing each other, until the wasteland came into view. Then I heard someone shouting behind us. It was Jushing, pedaling hard on his bicycle, out of breath, scolding me for not telling him I was heading out to plow. He'd promised to help and I'd left without a word. I apologized with a laugh. I'd honestly just forgotten. The three of us walked past the old graveyard to the edge of the 30 acres. The moment Jushing and Susu saw the land, their eyes went wide. Jushing dropped to his knees to look closer, then shouted in disbelief. There's grass growing here. This land is actually growing grass. The wasteland had transformed. Bright green grass covered the ground where nothing had grown for a decade. Not the wispy, late summer kind that sometimes sprouted on washed-in topsoil, but sturdy spring shoots rooted deep. Susu pulled a few up and was amazed at how strong they were. Jushing was practically beside himself, squeezing handfuls of soil and declaring it vastly improved. I played it cool, saying the land must have naturally recovered over time. I reminded Susu of the soil samples I'd shown her before. The ground wasn't as hopeless as everyone thought. Jushing kept pressing me, asking privately if I'd really planned to farm this land or had some other scheme. Maybe an animal farm or a brick kiln. I deflected everything with a smile. I couldn't exactly tell him I was waiting for the summer flood to wash away the remaining lime and turn the whole place into proper farmland overnight. He turned out to be surprisingly fun company. While we plowed, he gossiped about Dongmei's husband keeping a mistress at the township. He even offered to point the woman out next time I visited. Under that stern, educated exterior, Jushing was a natural gossip. It made me like him more. He reminded me of friends from my other life. We worked all afternoon with the donkey pulling the plow. In 4 hours, we'd turned over 2 acres. Not bad, especially since the land was mostly flat. Urju's father had leveled it when he built the limestone factory. Susu and I followed behind with rakes, breaking up the bigger clods. Haiwa and Xiaojin ran circles around us the whole time, barking at the resting donkey, dodging Jushing's attempts to pet them. They'd grown fast on the grotto water goat milk. Only 2 weeks old, but already energetic little bundles of muscle. As the sun set, we loaded up and headed home. I invited Jushing to stop by for more peanuts for his wife. He agreed without hesitation. After a half day of working and chatting together, we'd become real friends. But when we reached my gate, someone was already waiting. A man sat on the stone step smoking a pipe, while a small boy crouched nearby, playing with marbles. It was Wang Lixian and his son Leonie. Leonie jumped up before his father could speak. They brought us some game from the mountains. Wang Lixian stood up, and I saw what he'd been hiding. 2 wild pheasants and 2 big rabbits, tied with grass rope, plus a bamboo basket full of large green-shelled eggs that he wasn't sure were from wild ducks or some other bird. Lixian was my distant cousin and had been like a big brother to me. He'd helped my family many times, even solved a problem during my wedding. But after years of watching me waste my life, he'd given up trying. Now here he was, a thin, weathered man in faded work clothes, with messy hair and thick stubble. He looked worn down, but there was a quiet toughness about him. I knew the real reason for his visit, returning the favor for the pork I'd sent home with Leonie. I didn't make a fuss about it. I just grabbed his arm and announced we were having dinner together. Him, Jushing, and me. Jushing tried to leave, saying his wife was waiting, but I grabbed his bicycle and wheeled it into the yard before he could argue. Neither of them could escape. Susu played her part perfectly, scolding me for not helping Lixian carry things. His back was bad. I rushed over apologizing, and the ice was broken. Lixian watched Susu and me interact, and couldn't hide his surprise at how well we got along. He tried to leave again, saying his back meant he couldn't drink. I told him we'd just eat then, no excuses. When Susu chimed in, bragging about my cooking. Both men froze. Village husbands didn't cook. They stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. I got to work. I skinned the rabbits, marinated the meat with soy sauce, cooking wine, and spices. I plucked the pheasants in boiling water and put them in a clay pot with rehydrated mushrooms and wood ear fungus. Then I planned a sweet and sour carp from the fish in the back courtyard. 3 proper dishes. Even before anything was done, the smells had Jushing drooling worse than Leone. He sent the kid to buy cigarettes with his own money, telling him to keep the change for candy. Leone bolted into the dark with my flashlight. Leone came back with cigarettes and a stick of malt candy. He'd bought 2 milk candies too, but gave them both to Cece, the shy little girl in the red coat, because he'd found her crying outside her house, too scared to go in after her aunt scolded her again. I stood up immediately, worried about a small girl alone in the dark. But both Jushing and Lishian stopped me. They said it wasn't something I could fix. Susu pulled me aside and explained quietly. Cece was an abandoned child, adopted as a baby by old man Shinsangue. He'd raised her to 6 years old and loved her like his own granddaughter. Then his son and daughter-in-law, who couldn't have children of their own, officially adopted Cece. But the daughter-in-law was cruel. She hit and screamed at the girl over every little thing. When a kind village woman named Xiaoying spoke up for Cece, the daughter-in-law went to her house and cursed at her for hours. Her husband threw rocks into Xiaoying's well. Even Lishian had tried to intervene once and nearly got his face clawed. Nobody dared say anything anymore. Old Sangue knew what was happening but felt powerless. The adoption was legal, and he was too old to raise the girl himself. All he could do was visit his son's house several times a day to check on her. I sighed. There wasn't much I could do either, but at least the old man was watching out for her. Leone said he'd told Cece she could come see the puppies tomorrow. I told him to bring her. I'd make them something good to eat. Then I got cooking. I braised the rabbit meat, made sweet and sour carp, and the clay pot of pheasant with mushrooms finished simmering at just the right time. When I lifted the lid, the aroma hit everyone like a wave. Jushing was practically drooling on himself. Leone was gnawing his candy stick like it was a chicken leg, eyes locked on the food. I gave the boy a drumstick and told everyone to dig in. We ate under the yard light, 3 steaming dishes on the stone table with white steamed buns. Jushing plowed through 4 big buns and asked for more, his face red from the liquor. Leone stared at him in awe, thinking even the pigs didn't eat that much. Lishian didn't drink because of his bad back, but he ate plenty. The smell carried through half the village. It was dinner time, and everyone else was eating plain porridge and steamed buns. People cursed under their breath, wondering which fool was stewing meat on an ordinary weeknight, making their own food taste like cardboard. Across the lane, Dongmei recognized exactly where the smell was coming from and nearly choked on her own rage. Over dinner, Lishian said he'd help me work the land after the village finished redistributing plots. He wasn't going back to construction work this year. His Cruise Hong Kong investor had fled without paying, leaving him owed more than half a year's wages. At 15 yuan a day, that was serious money for his family. Jushing was shocked at the daily rate, but Lishian shrugged it off. 10 years of experience earned him that, and it still wasn't enough with a wife and eldest daughter who were both mute, a 5th daughter about to take school exams, and Leone starting primary school soon. Susu brought out reheated porridge. Jushing was too stuffed to touch it, but I drank a bowl. Grotto water porridge was too valuable to waste. Both men stared at my appetite. I'd eaten as much as anyone, and my stomach was still flat. I joked that if I really let loose, I could eat a whole cow. Around 9, everyone finally stood up to leave. Leone's belly was round as a little watermelon. I made Susu give them flashlights for the walk home. The village was pitch black by that hour. Jushing wobbled away with his bicycle, promising to come help again tomorrow. Susu hooked her arm through mine as we watched them go. She was happy. For the first time since our marriage, people were actually coming to our house as friends, laughing and eating together. No gossip, no pity visits, no lectures about my behavior. She believed now, more than ever, that I'd really changed. Over the next several days, I kept working the wasteland. Jushing showed up every day. Lishian couldn't come but sent his son-in-law's donkey, giving us 2 animals to plow with. 2 donkeys could match a small tractor on flat ground, and the land was mostly level from the old factory days. We did 6 to 8 acres a day and finished most of the 30 acres within the week. I left about 10 acres unplowed on purpose. I had plans to plant crops, dig a pond, grow lotus, and raise fish there. When the plowing was done, I returned the donkey cart to Fifth Uncle's house, bringing more vegetables and peanuts as thanks. His wife greeted me warmly this time. She'd found out greenhouse vegetables sold for 2 yuan a jean in the county, so suddenly my gifts were quite valuable in her eyes. Outside Fifth Uncle's gate, villagers were arguing about the new land assignments. Who got good plots? Who got stuck next to greedy neighbors who'd steal boundary rows? They all went quiet when they saw me walking with Jushing. The whole village was still trying to figure out how the laziest man in town had become friends with the only college-educated person in the village. At Fifth Uncle's house, his wife grabbed my vegetables with both hands while pretending she didn't want them. I smiled through it, knowing she'd already given last time's greens to her younger son's family and only passed the peanuts to Jushing reluctantly. Then she remembered. The township family planning director, Qin Xiaomei, had been waiting for Jushing. Xiaomei needed new propaganda slogans. The township leadership said the old ones were too stiff and formal. Villagers couldn't understand them. Since Jushing was the most educated person in the area, they'd sent her to ask for help. She looked striking that evening. Black suit, white shirt, hair pulled back in a ponytail, showing off her elegant neck. Every man in the yard was staring. Jushing was momentarily stunned too, then sat down and quickly wrote a dozen slogans. But when Xiaomei read them, she frowned gently. They were well written, but too political, too formal. Ordinary farmers wouldn't connect with them. Jushing tried again. Same problem. He was stuck in his educated writing style and couldn't break out of it. Meanwhile, I sat on a stool nearby, petting Fifth Uncle's cat, staying out of it. Finally, Jushing snapped at me to help. I shrugged and said I wasn't good at that fancy stuff. But Xiaomei caught something I'd said casually, too preachy, and said that was exactly the problem she couldn't articulate. She asked if I could try something simpler, more down-to-earth. So I dipped into memories from my other life, where these slogans had been plastered on every village wall for decades. I rattled off over a dozen. Fewer births, better births, a happy life. Mountain people want to get rich? Have fewer kids, plant more trees. Crops planted too thick grow thin. Too many children are hard to raise well. Newlyweds entering the bridal chamber. Don't forget family planning. Everyone went quiet. Xiaomei's pale face flushed with excitement. She said they were perfect, catchy, simple, and could be used across the entire county. She actually reached out and shook my hand, calling me Comrade Fugaway. Her hand was ice cold, like there was no warmth in her at all. Jushing punched my shoulder, half annoyed that I'd been sitting there the whole time, letting him struggle. I told him I'd assumed they wanted the formal stuff. We headed to his house for dinner, but I told him not to bring Susu. His wife was nursing a baby, and strangers at night would be inconvenient. On the way, Jushing grabbed the bag of peanuts his mother had tossed aside. He laughed awkwardly and said his parents didn't eat peanuts. I understood. His mother thought peanuts weren't as valuable as vegetables. I made a mental note. I needed to buy my own donkey or ox, so I could stop borrowing from Fifth Uncle's family and having to bribe that woman every time. We walked into Jushing's dark house and heard a loud crash from inside that made us both jump. Inside, Jushing's wife Qiaoling was standing in the dark with a flashlight, scared. A loud crash had come from the west room. We went to investigate and found the source: rats. A whole pack of big gray ones had gotten into the crock where Jushing stored the peanuts I'd given him. They'd knocked off the heavy iron weights on the lid and were calmly carrying peanuts along the electrical wires up to the ceiling beams, even with the light on. Jushing grabbed a broom and swung wildly, but couldn't hit a single one. I knew exactly what had attracted them. My peanuts, grown with grotto water, were irresistible to animals. I'd seen the same thing with our chickens and the donkey. I told them to keep the peanuts in their bedroom from now on, where the activity would keep rats away. The whole stash was ruined, chewed through, mixed with droppings. Jushing was furious. I told him not to worry, I had plenty more. Then Jushing insisted I cook dinner to prove to Qiaoling that he hadn't been lying about my skills. She tried to be polite and said a guest shouldn't cook, but Jushing was determined. He wanted to win the argument they'd been having all week. She'd been complaining about him eating at my place every day, doubting the food was really that special. Their yard was long and narrow, full of trees and water crocks of various sizes. The cooking stove was clever, a small water crock lined with clay, with ventilation holes cut in. Xiaoling had ingredients ready. I cooked 4 dishes and a soup, sneaking in some grotto water when nobody was looking under the dim yard light. The moment the food hit the table, the smell filled the air. Xiaoling's eyes went wide. She swallowed hard, finally understanding why her husband had been spending every mealtime at my house. Juxing grinned at her triumphantly. She just said quietly, "Let me go get the baby." We were both starving after a day in the fields, so we dug in as soon as Xiaoling brought the baby out. I'd made 5 dishes, only one with meat, the rest vegetables. But with the grotto water mixed in, everything tasted amazing. Even Xiaoling, who'd been skeptical about me, couldn't stop praising the food. When I left, she gave me 2 jars of her homemade pickled vegetables. Juxing bragged that her pickles were the best in the area. His co-workers at the police station fought over them every time he brought some in. I told him I'd send Susu over to learn the recipe. Back home, Susu had hot water ready. We bathed together and went to bed. The next morning, rain again. I pulled Susu close, planning to sleep late. But within half an hour, shouting and cursing outside woke us both. Susu pushed me up, worried something had happened. I threw on clothes and went out with an umbrella. The whole lane was packed with people. Dongmei was screaming at an old woman called Granny Wang, accusing her of poisoning her chickens. Dongmei's yard was full of dead hens lying in the rain, soaked and muddy. The old woman denied it, saying she'd never poisoned anything. She countered that Dongmei's chickens had destroyed her watermelon seedlings, plants she'd been raising to transplant into her newly assigned field. The argument spiraled. Dongmei demanded 10 yuan per chicken in compensation. The old woman was shaking with anger, nearly in tears. Fifth uncle arrived with his tattered umbrella and scolded them both for fighting in the rain instead of coming to the village office. Dongmei sneered that the office never solved anything. Fifth uncle ignored her attitude and suggested they examine the dead chickens first. Xiaomei stood nearby, embarrassed by her sister's behavior, trying uselessly to calm her down. But Dongmei was the dominant sister despite being younger. She'd taken care of sickly Xiaomei since childhood and acted like she was in charge. The crowd moved into Dongmei's yard and crouched around the dead chickens. Someone noticed something and called out. The chickens hadn't been poisoned at all. Each one had a small bloody hole in its neck. Something had bitten through and killed them. I stood at the back of the crowd and looked closer. The puncture wounds were small and neat, almost invisible under the wet feathers. This wasn't poison. Some animal had gotten into the coop in the night and killed every single chicken. The crowd examined the dead chickens and found the truth. Each one had a small puncture wound on the back of its neck. They hadn't been poisoned at all. Fifth uncle said it looked like a weasel attack. Dongmei's face changed instantly. Weasels were considered bad luck in the countryside, almost taboo to talk about. Granny Wang seized the moment and mocked her, saying she'd brought it on herself with her mean behavior. The 2 women started screaming at each other again. I told Susu it was just a weasel, and we went home for breakfast. Fifth uncle came by afterward, carrying 2 of Dongmei's dead chickens he'd bought to calm the situation down. He offered me one and kept the other. But something caught my attention. When fifth uncle walked in with those chickens, Haiwa and Xiaojin didn't come to investigate like they normally would with any visitor. Instead, they hid. When I looked their way, they ducked their heads and scurried back inside. That guilty behavior made me suspicious. Could my 2 tiny puppies have killed all those chickens? They were barely 2 weeks old, but they were growing fast on grotto water, and they were unnaturally smart. I remembered Dongmei saying they'd been sneaking into her chicken coop before. Maybe they were taking revenge for being kicked. I shook my head. It seemed too crazy, but I couldn't shake the thought. Fifth uncle then asked if I'd cook lunch for some township officials visiting that day. Juxing had been bragging about my cooking and my slogans. I declined. Today was the big market day at Changle Township, and I needed to go buy a donkey or ox, so I'd stop borrowing from other people. Fifth uncle was disappointed but understood. He left 1 chicken for us and took the other. As he walked out, he grumbled that I was still lazy at heart, but I could tell he was warming up to me. I grabbed my old Phoenix bicycle and rode out toward Changle Township, over 20 li of mountain roads. It had been nearly 20 years since I'd attended a proper country market day. In my other life, I'd gone back to visit a few times, but the markets had lost all their old magic. Today, when I finally crested the last hill and saw the big stone archway reading, Changle, with the endless rows of stalls stretching behind it, the noise and smell and color all rushing toward me at once. I felt a warmth spread through my chest and couldn't stop grinning. I hadn't been to a proper country market in nearly 20 years, so I took my time. The Changle market was laid out in a cross pattern through the whole town, stalls stretching in every direction as far as I could see. I pushed my bicycle from one end to the other, buying snacks along the way. Pork head meat at 3 yuan a jean. Expensive, since it had been less than 2 at New Year. Stuffed flat cakes, 5 mao for 3. I bought so much my hands were full, drawing curious stares from other shoppers. I ducked behind the township government building to use the outhouse and stashed everything in the grotto. Then I followed a group of young guys heading to get haircuts. My own hair was getting long. Out here, people still called it shaving heads rather than getting a haircut. Barbers set up open-air stalls at the market, carrying their tools on shoulder poles with little flag posts. The barber was an old man who looked like the comedian Ma Sanli. High nose, small eyes, quick hands. I watched him work on a yellow-faced old farmer who sat with his eyes closed, purring about how good it felt. The teenage boys waiting their turn teased the old barber about his skills, but he just smiled and kept cutting without missing a beat. When my turn came, the best part was the hair wash. Thick soap lather poured over my scalp, 10 fingers scratching and scrubbing every inch. Pure bliss. The old barber was one of the good ones, thorough and gentle. While he cut, he told me I had a lucky face with big earlobes. I laughed and said my only real luck was marrying a good wife. He chuckled and said a good wife was the greatest fortune a man could have. The whole haircut cost 5 mao. I left feeling clean and light, ready to go find myself a donkey. After the haircut, I kept browsing. I bought vegetable seeds, grain seeds, snacks. My hands were overflowing again. I ducked into an alley and stashed everything in the grotto. While I was inside, I dropped off 7 male turtles I'd bought from a market stall, cleaned out the seller's entire stock of males. I tossed them into the pool with the big female, who'd grown to the size of a pot lid by now. She poked her head up expecting food and froze when she saw the newcomers. I laughed and told her they were her new husbands. They were small, but grotto water would grow them fast, and having them compete would select for the strongest genes. The fish pond was thriving too. The fish had already spawned, and tiny fry floated across the surface. I poured fresh stream water into both pools and watched everything come alive, turtles and fish splashing around in excitement. Back outside, I loaded 2 baskets onto my bicycle, one of vegetables, one of peanuts, all quick-grown with grotto water outside the grotto. I planned to try selling them at the township's oil press and general store. The peanuts sold fine at the oil press, though the price was a mao lower than in the county. The general store was a different story. They thought the vegetables were too expensive and tried to lowball me. I got annoyed by their attitude and walked out. I decided to set up a stall for an hour. Then my back tire exploded with a bang. I checked the bike and found both tires were shot, bulging with rat bumps everywhere. The chain needed oil too. The old me had ridden this wedding gift bicycle for years without maintaining it once. While I was crouching by the bike, the old farmer from the barber's stall called me over to help crank start a beat-up tractor at the grain station. I grabbed the handle and spun it hard. The engine coughed black smoke and rumbled to life. The old man was impressed and pointed me to a good repair shop nearby. Before I left, he noticed my baskets of cucumbers and tomatoes. His eyes went wide, fresh vegetables in March. I told him they were greenhouse-grown. He asked the price. I held up 2 fingers. He guessed 2 mao. I said 2 yuan. His face fell instantly. That was nearly as much as pork. He lost interest and walked away, muttering that nobody would pay that at the market. I wasn't worried. After the summer flood, even plain cabbage would hit 1 yuan a jean. My price was fair by city standards. But for now, I just needed to find a repair shop, set up a stall while the bike got fixed, and if nothing sold by noon, go buy my donkey and head home. I set up my baskets by the big stone archway at the village entrance, right next to a bike repair stall run by a square-faced man called Guo Bao Lai and a candy figurine seller, a round old man with patchy white skin named Zhang Tigan, who everyone called Old Jen. I shouted my prices, 2 yuan a jean for cucumbers and tomatoes. People gathered quickly, drawn by the novelty of fresh vegetables in March. I broke open some cucumbers for samples. The bike repairman took one bite, and his eyes went wide. He gave me a thumbs up immediately. Everyone who tasted the samples loved them. But nobody bought. 2 yuan was almost as much as pork, and country people simply wouldn't spend that on vegetables. I gave some cucumbers and tomatoes to old Jin and Baolai as thanks for watching my stuff. While Baolai fixed my blown tires, we chatted and became friendly. Both were locals. Baolai repaired bikes, shoes, and pots, and even castrated pigs. Old Jin wandered from village to village selling candy figurines. Old Jin's niece showed up, a stylish woman in her 30s named Lu Yinhuan, visiting from Beijing with her young son. The chubby little boy had loved the tomato old Jin gave him earlier, calling it the most delicious thing he'd ever eaten. Yinhuan scolded the boy for not saying thank you, then looked around for whoever was selling the produce. Old Jin pointed at me. Yinhuan mentioned she worked at a television station in Beijing and had only gotten a few days off. Old Jin was visibly emotional. He hadn't seen his niece in 10 years and felt too humble to meet her important husband. The whole exchange was touching. An old country man wanting to connect with family that had moved far beyond his world, not knowing how. Baolai nudged me and said it looked like I might finally make a sale. I laughed and said one woman with a kid wasn't going to buy much. But I wiped my mouth, took a drink of water, and walked over. I walked over, and the woman, Lu Yinhuan, said she wanted to buy tomatoes for her son. I warned her about the price, but she didn't blink. The little boy had already fallen in love with the taste and shouted that he wanted the entire basket. His mother pointed out they couldn't carry 100 Jin home. The kid solved that instantly. Tell Daddy to drive the car over. Baolai leaned in and whispered. A car meant at least 100,000 yuan. These were seriously wealthy people. Soon, Yinhuan's husband arrived, a tall, well-dressed man named Liang Yuemin, maybe 35, carrying a mobile phone in one hand and a wooden lunchbox in the other. Behind him shuffled Yinhuan's father, a weathered old man with a tobacco pipe. The old man scolded old Jin for not coming to the house, and the son-in-law was warm and respectful, telling old Jin that Yinhuan had always spoken about. How he'd carried her to school on his shoulder pole and once fought off a wolf with nothing but a carrying stick. The old candy seller's eyes went red. After about 20 minutes of family reunion, the whole group came to my stall. Liang Yuemin sniffed the produce, said he could already smell something special, and asked to taste. I handed over samples. He bit into a tomato and his eyes widened. Then he tried a cucumber and actually closed his eyes, took a slow breath, and compared it to drinking water after walking out of the Sahara Desert. Cool, sweet, reaching deep into the soul. I tasted one myself, puzzled. These were just the outside-grown, grotto water-diluted ones, not the premium stuff. Was this guy exaggerating? His reaction seemed almost too intense. I made a mental note to dilute the grotto water even more in the future. One notch above ordinary was plenty. No need to draw too much attention. His wife had just finished her tomato and said she was too full for cucumber. Women laughed and said they'd buy it all to eat at home. Then he turned to me with a big smile. I'll take everything, both baskets. Let me go get the car. Don't sell any to anyone else. Old Jin worried his niece was wasting money, but Yinhuan just smiled and said if her husband wanted to buy everything, that was fine. The little boy wanted to bring some back to Beijing for his friends. Yinhuan mentioned they'd be dropping some off at Xiaoming's grandparents in Fenglei town on their way. My ears perked up. Beijing family, going to Fenglei town, the same place I'd lied about being from when I met Liang Hongyu and Qin Rongxian at the county river. The boy's last name was Liang. This had to be the same family. I didn't say anything, but I was almost certain now. Soon a black SUV rolled up outside the archway. A Beijing-plated vehicle that drew the entire market crowd like a magnet. People swarmed to stare. Nobody around here had ever seen a luxury car up close, let alone one from the capital. Liang Yuemin stepped out and made me an offer. 3 yuan per jean instead of 2. Calculated at 150 jean per basket, baskets included. No need to weigh anything. The crowd gasped. 3 yuan for vegetables was more than pork. People muttered about rich fools throwing money around. I agreed without fuss. We loaded the baskets into the SUV and he handed me 900 yuan from his briefcase. Just like that, in one sale, I'd made enough to buy a young calf. Before leaving, Yuemin gave me a business card and said to call if I ever had more produce. I pocketed it, thinking the connection to Liang Hongyu's family might be useful someday, though I played it casual. Old Jin left with his niece's family in the car. Baolai shook his head in amazement, saying I'd earned a whole calf's worth from 2 baskets of vegetables. I laughed and said it was just lucky timing. A rich Beijing family visiting their hometown. Lightning doesn't strike the same place twice. Baolai reminded me we still needed to go look at livestock. His wife could watch both stalls. So I pushed my freshly repaired bicycle and followed him toward the animal market. The livestock market was at the far west end of the fairgrounds, a big open field with trees scattered around, animals tied to the trunks. Pigs, dogs, cows, horses, donkeys, sheep, chickens, ducks, rabbits, everything alive was for sale. The smell of animal urine hit us like a wall. Baolai led me to his contact, a livestock broker everyone called Old Ba. Turned out it was the same yellow-faced old man I'd helped start the tractor that morning. He recognized me instantly and laughed at the coincidence. Old Ba was thorough. He examined every donkey in the market, checked teeth, felt the body, inspected hooves, then stood there smoking his pipe in silence. The donkey sellers got nervous. One called out asking which one he liked. Old Ba ignored him and turned to me. How about a mule instead? Mules were strong workers, but couldn't breed. So many people avoided them. I didn't care. I just needed something to pull a cart and a plow. But after examining the mules, Old Ba shook his head at every one. He said the afternoon stock was all leftovers. The good animals sold in the morning. He suggested I come back next market day, earlier. I was about to agree when I heard an unusual mooing sound from nearby. Tied to a big locust tree was a young water buffalo, but not an ordinary one. It was pure white from head to tail, except for brown hooves and gray-white horns. Beautiful and strange, like an albino. A man was trying to inspect it, but the little white buffalo kept dodging around the tree, crying out in fear. It wouldn't let anyone near. I said it looked interesting and wanted a closer look. Baolai shook his head. He'd seen this animal at several markets already. Nobody would buy it because it was terrified of strangers. If its owner forced it to stand still, it would panic, defecate everywhere, and scream like it was being slaughtered. Completely useless for work. Old Ba puffed his pipe and added that white cattle were said to have special eyes that could see ghosts. That's why they were always so frightened. Supposedly they saw things other animals couldn't. I wanted to see it up close anyway. When I approached, the little white buffalo hid half its face behind the tree trunk and peeked at me with big round eyes, like a shy girl, not a scared animal. I tried reaching out slowly. It dodged, but didn't scream. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't fear, it was bashfulness. Some animals are just like introverted children. They need gentleness, not force. The owner was a big, dark-skinned man who said the calf was perfectly tame at home, played with his kids, let the family touch it. It just couldn't handle strangers, especially adults. He wanted 1,000 yuan. Old Ba laughed and said 600 was generous. White cattle had thin skin that attracted flies and parasites, couldn't gain weight properly, and even fully grown would only sell for 1,000 as meat. He offered 650 and started walking away, pulling me with him. I understood the tactic, classic negotiation. The seller panicked and called out that he'd take 650. We went back. I paid, and the man blindfolded the calf with a cloth strip to keep it calm. I asked Baolai to bring me one of the cucumbers he'd been keeping. I held it near the blindfolded calf's nose. It mooed softly and stretched its mouth toward the smell. I pulled the cucumber back a step. The calf followed. Another step. It followed again. Just like that, I let it out of the market with a cucumber, one hand on my bicycle, while the seller and Baolai stared with their mouths open. I said goodbye to Baolai at the archway and headed home. Once I was alone on the road with nobody in sight, I pulled the little white buffalo into the grotto. Inside the grotto, I removed the blindfold. The little white buffalo saw a stranger and stumbled backward in fright. I held out the cucumber. It wanted to come closer, but didn't dare, just stood there blinking those big dark eyes. So I set the cucumber on the ground and walked away. It crept forward, picked it up, and started munching with its eyes half closed in bliss. I brought out an armful of overgrown spinach from the cottage, too tough and stringy for people, but perfect for a calf. I tossed pieces closer and closer to where I sat. The buffalo followed the trail, eating each one. By the time the spinach was gone, it let me pat its head without flinching. Then I gave it half a bucket of stream water. It mooed happily and drank it all, then licked my hand begging for more. I tied it to a date tree behind the cottage and headed home. The ride back took 2 hours over mountain roads and a river crossing. When I pedaled into the village with a white calf trotting behind my bicycle, every dog in town went crazy barking. The calf froze, too scared to move. I had to get off and shoo the dogs away. Villagers came out to stare. The gossip started immediately. That full-body, useless white cow, he got cheated again. What's wrong with him this year? At home, Susu was sewing in the yard while Leonie's gang played around a bamboo basket. Haiwa and Xiaojin, now almost a month old and bigger than normal 2-month puppies from all the grotto milk, came running and barking with joy. Then they spotted the calf peeking from behind me and started barking at it instead. The kids went wild over the white buffalo. Susu frowned at first, saying white cattle attract terrible insects in summer. I told her I had a solution. The calf was perfect with the children. Let them pet it, stood still, eyes half closed with pleasure. But when Susu tried to touch it, it dodged behind me and peeked out with one eye, exactly like a shy girl hiding behind her father. Susu squealed with delight. All her concerns about the color vanished. She asked how I'd gotten it to trust me so quickly. I told Susu I'd explain my secret method later, which made her pout adorably. She'd been opening up more every day, questioning me, even playfully sulking. It made me happier than anything. Then I noticed a basket of chirping chicks in the yard. Leonie's mute mother had hatched a batch and sent some over for us through the boy. Leonie was there with his gang, and I learned he'd started primary school. His friends immediately tattled on him. He still had snot running down his face, picked his toes in class, and tricked a boy from the next village into licking his fingers by saying they were sweet. The kid found out, they fought, and Leonie got punished standing for 2 class periods. Susu and I couldn't stop laughing. After the children left, I tied the calf in the back courtyard with a big pile of spinach and cleaned out the old chicken coops for the new chicks. Village families raised chickens from spring through autumn, then sold or slaughtered most before winter to save on feed. We only had 1 rooster and 3 hens left from last year. The next morning was beautiful, warm spring breeze, our yard full of blooming begonias. I took the white calf out for its first walk, with Haiwa and Xiaojin bounding alongside. The puppies went crazy once we left the village, chasing butterflies, barking at the slow-walking calf, rolling in muddy dew until they were filthy, then rubbing their dirty paws all over my legs. I scolded them, and they settled down for about 30 seconds before spotting a wild rabbit and tearing off after it. At the wasteland, the grass had grown tall and green since my last visit. The land still wasn't perfect, soil too dry and hard in places, but after 2 rounds of deep plowing, it looked vastly better than the barren waste it had been weeks ago. Even the surviving trees from the village's old planting effort, stunted and yellow-leafed after 10 years, showed signs of life. Susu had been asking what I planned to plant. I thought fruit trees might work. With grotto water nurturing them, I could grow vegetables and melons underneath. I walked up to one of those dying trees, a ginkgo, and poured a bucket of water from the grotto's fish pond over its roots. The ground around the trunk bubbled and hissed as the soil drank it in. Then I heard rustling above my head. The ginkgo was coming back to life, branches stretching, leaves unfurling, growing before my eyes until it spread into a full green canopy in seconds. The calf followed me around, nibbling fresh leaves off the newly revived trees. I went from trunk to trunk with my bucket, pouring grotto pond water on each one. Within minutes, every surviving tree, ginkgo and paulownia alike, burst back to life, branches spreading, leaves unfurling. The trunks were still thin, but the canopies were full and green. After 10 years of barely surviving, these trees looked healthy again. I decided fruit trees were the way to go, even if the summer flood destroyed them. As long as the roots survived, 1 dose of grotto water would bring them right back. Simple, low effort, and profitable year after year. Meanwhile, Haiwa and Xiaojin had found a lizard near the graveyard and were tormenting it, taking turns pouncing, pinning its tail, letting it run, then catching it again. They played until the lizard stopped moving. Then Haiwa ripped it in half with 1 shake of his head. The jaw strength on a month-old puppy was startling. Then both dogs trotted over and dropped the carcass at my feet, staring up expectantly, like kids bringing a broken toy to their father. I rewarded them with grotto water and told them to always bring their catches to me. Training had to start somewhere. Back home, Dongmei's house was erupting again, crashing dishes, screaming, her husband's tired voice trying to calm her down. Wang Chunyuan had finally come home, and she was letting him have it. With her sister gone back to the township and every neighbor thoroughly alienated, nobody was going to step in. Over breakfast, chowling's excellent pickled vegetables with porridge, Susu brought up planting again. Before I could answer, Lixian showed up at the gate. He asked why I wasn't at the greenhouse construction site. Apparently Erju had come back to the village, started building his greenhouses today, and hired every man in our section of the village at 10 yuan a day with lunch included. Everyone except me. I told Lixian that Erju had never asked me. Susu confirmed it. Lixian was puzzled. He'd assumed Erju and I were close from our county days. I just shrugged. I knew exactly why I'd been skipped. Erju was still sore that I'd dodged his free labor scheme when we met in town. Let him sulk. After the way he'd cheated me on the land swap, not slapping him across the face was already more restraint than he deserved. Lixian urged me to come along anyway. 10 yuan a day for over a month meant 300 or 400 yuan, half a year's spending money. He thought I was being lazy again. But I explained. Erju had called every single household in our section of the village, even the 60-year-old village doctor. He'd deliberately left me out. This wasn't an oversight. It was payback for refusing to be his free watchman. Erju's whole personality was about showing off. He paid workers more than anyone else, offered higher land rental fees than neighboring villages, all to prove how rich and powerful he'd become. But his ego was fragile. When I didn't jump at his command in town, he took it as disrespect. Now he wanted me to watch everyone else earn money while I got nothing, hoping I'd crawl to him begging for work. When Lixian understood, he stood up and said he wouldn't go either. I grabbed his arm and told him absolutely not. He had 7 mouths to feed and couldn't afford to throw away a paying job over my pride. Susu backed me up. We talked him down, though he was clearly angry on my behalf. Before leaving, Lixian asked what I'd done to upset Erju. I told him about the county encounter. He cursed and said Erju had been stringing me along about the quarry job all this time. His girlfriend's connections made it effortless to place someone there, and his own construction boss's nephew had gotten in just last autumn. The quarry promise was always a lie, used to manipulate me into doing whatever Erju wanted. After Lixian left, Susu quietly apologized. She said she'd always thought my trips to the county were just fooling around, but now she realized I'd been trying to build a relationship with Erju to get into the quarry. I sighed inside. The truth was, the old me really had been fooling around. She had nothing to apologize for. Over breakfast dishes, I told Susu my plan to plant fruit trees on the wasteland. She thought about it carefully and said she wasn't sure they'd survive. The soil had only just started recovering after 10 years of being dead. Could it really support trees already? I reassured Susu. I'd seen the old trees at the wasteland that morning, all bursting with fresh green leaves after years of looking half dead. If they could recover, fruit trees could definitely grow there. Her eyes lit up, and she asked to come see for herself that afternoon. I headed out to find old Chin Sangue about building a cattle cart. But his house was empty. He'd gone to help build Erju's greenhouses too. Turned out Erju had recruited men from 2 whole village sections, over 100 workers. At 10 yuan a day for a month, that was 30,000 yuan in labor costs alone. Between land rental, materials, and construction crews, his total investment had to be near 100,000. All bankrolled by his rich girlfriend. I'd have to wait over a month for my cart. Walking home, I found the yard swarming with bees and butterflies around the blooming begonias. I caught a few bees, butterflies, and even grabbed some ants, all for a small experiment in the grotto. Susu laughed and asked why I was acting like a child. Then we heard frantic barking outside. It sounded like Haiwa and Xiaojin mixed with several neighborhood dogs. We hurried out and found 5 or 6 dogs circling a pile of old coal slag behind Granny Wang's house. Pressed against the wall were 2 yellow animals, weasels. One was dead on the ground. The other was alive, baring its teeth at the dogs, darting back and forth. Granny Wang nearly fainted when she saw them. In the countryside, weasels were called great immortals. People believed harming them brought terrible curses. The old woman immediately started bowing and apologizing to the living weasel, begging the great immortal to forgive the rude dogs. Haiwa and Xiaojin, proud of their kill, tried to drag the dead weasel toward me as a trophy. Granny Wang shooed them away in a panic, terrified of offending the weasel's spirit further. So it was my dogs after all. First Dongmei's chickens, now weasels. These grotto-enhanced puppies were turning into little hunters faster than I'd imagined. Granny Wong kept bowing and apologizing to the weasel, begging the great immortal to forgive everyone. I tried to tell her to check on her own chickens first, but she scolded me for being disrespectful. In the countryside, weasels were practically sacred. People called them yellow immortals and believed crossing one brought terrible revenge. The old woman was convinced that Dongmei's chickens died because Dongmei had bad karma, and that showing proper respect would keep her own family safe. While she lectured us, the living weasel grabbed its dead companion and started dragging it along the wall. Susu spotted them and called out. But Granny Wong just smiled and said the immortal was leaving because it saw her sincerity. Then both weasels suddenly bolted. The dead one had been faking the whole time. Classic weasel trick. I had to laugh. Back home, I grabbed both dogs by the ears and scolded them for running off again. They hung their heads, covered in leaves and cobwebs from chasing the weasels through who knows where. These two were growing fast and getting bolder every day. They'd made friends with every dog in the village through Leonie's gang of kids, and now any barking outside sent them racing out the door. Susu couldn't control them when I wasn't home. She wondered why the weasels had appeared in broad daylight. I figured it was because all the men were at Urju's construction site. With fewer people around, the weasels felt safe enough to come out. Then Susu reminded me about the chicken fifth uncle had given us, the one killed by the weasel. She'd salted it yesterday, but we hadn't cooked it yet. So I cleaned it up, stuffed it with scallions, ginger, mushrooms, grotto dates and lotus seeds, wrapped it in grotto lotus leaves, coated it in clay, and buried it in the hot coals. Beggar's chicken. Normally, it takes hours of drying and marinating, but with grotto ingredients, the shortcuts didn't matter. When I cracked open the clay shell, the golden skin was crispy and the meat inside was tender and fragrant, sweet from the dates, fresh from the lotus leaves, impossibly delicious. Susu came out with a basket of steamed buns, sniffed the air, and her eyes went wide. She grabbed a chicken foot and started nibbling. I handed her a drumstick and told her to eat real meat. But she just kept gnawing on the feet and wings first, her favorite parts. I watched her holding a chicken foot in both hands like a little hamster and couldn't understand how she found those bony bits more appealing than the actual meat. After lunch, I put Susu on the white calf's back and led them both toward the wasteland. The calf had warmed up to her over the past 2 days, maybe because she carried my scent, or maybe her gentle nature put it at ease the way children did. We passed through the village. A few women were painting my slogans on walls around town. Susu read them proudly and said she'd heard even Jushin couldn't come up with anything. But when she got to, won't get snipped, house gets ripped, won't comply, wave your livestock goodbye, she frowned and said that one was a bit much. I just shrugged and said if the officials liked it, it wasn't my place to argue. South of the village, Urju's greenhouse site was buzzing with activity. Donkey carts hauling bamboo poles, cement, and thick plastic sheeting back and forth. The road from the highway was too rough for the delivery truck, so everything had to be transferred by animal cart. Now I understood why he needed so many workers. 50 acres of greenhouses meant days just moving materials, then concrete pillars to support the frames. At our wasteland, Susu saw the revived trees and her face glowed. She didn't question my fruit tree plan anymore. Then she remembered she'd forgotten her herb collecting basket at home. She'd planned to gather medicinal plants on the mountain after checking the land. I told her we could just mark the spots today and come back tomorrow with the basket. We tied the calf and headed up the mountain path together. As we walked, I thought about all those times Susu had climbed these mountains alone to gather herbs and sell them at market, just to cover the money I'd been wasting in the county. A young woman, alone in the mountains and on dangerous roads. The thought still made my chest ache. Now she was practically skipping up the trail ahead of me, calling back for me to hurry. Suddenly a gray blur shot across our path, a fat wild rabbit. Haiwa and Xiaojin burst after it, barking wildly, but they were too small and slow. I called them back and scolded them for running off. In these mountains, villagers set steel traps everywhere for game. A puppy could easily step on one and lose a leg. Sure enough, we hadn't gone far before I spotted a rusted steel trap hidden among some cornel bushes. The calf had wandered over to eat the flowers and almost stepped on it. I showed the dogs, but they just wagged their tails cluelessly. So I poked the trap with a stick. It snapped the branch in half with a loud crack. That scared them. Both puppies puffed up their fur and barked at the trap. Good, now they knew. We moved deeper into the forest. It was too early for most herbs, but the mountain cornel was flowering nicely, and we passed a bamboo grove where fresh spring shoots were pushing up thick and dense. I told Susu I'd come back tomorrow just for those. I was already planning a dish with juicing smoked pork. She laughed and said I was really just after his bacon. Then Susu grabbed my arm. She'd spotted what she thought was a scorpion near my foot. Turned out it was just a shed shell. But there were more shells every few steps. This area clearly had a lot of scorpions. Susu told me she'd been stung as a child and was terrified of them ever since. I held her hand and told her not to come this way alone. The dogs ate the empty scorpion shells out of curiosity, then lost interest and ran ahead. They started barking at something by a big tree. Susu got there first and squealed with excitement. It was a snake, a gray one with triangular head markings. Venomous. I yanked her arm to pull back, but she just smiled at me calmly and walked right up to it. Before I could say a word, she had the snake pinched behind the head, holding it up while it thrashed and hissed. She turned to me with a sweet grin, completely relaxed. I stood there with my mouth open. This woman who nearly fainted at a scorpion shell had just barehanded a poisonous snake like it was nothing. She explained that her family raised snakes back in the mountain village. It was as natural to her as handling chickens. She reminded me about the wedding gift from her mother, a jar of liquor steeped in snake gallbladders, still sitting untouched in our cellar. Then she told me to look near where the snake had been coiled. Under the tree were dozens of pale, bare stalks poking from the ground. Gastrodia, a valuable medicinal herb. Susu was thrilled. There was a whole patch of it. We'd need the basket to harvest it all, so we'd come back tomorrow. She pinned the snake's head with a forked stick, and Haiwa darted in and bit it. Xiaojin grabbed the tail. They ripped it in two and trotted over to drop both halves at my feet, tails wagging, looking up for praise. Susu smacked their heads. You two little traitors, always trying to impress him instead of me. The dogs had figured out my reward system from the lizard incident. Bring me prey, get grotto water. Smart little hustlers. But this time the snake was Susu's catch, not theirs, so I shooed them off. We spent the rest of the afternoon wandering through the spring forest. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden threads. Birds sang everywhere, wildflowers dotted the ground, and rabbits and pheasants burst from the underbrush with the dogs in hopeless pursuit. We found several good herbs, some yellow essence, golden thread orchid, plus the gastrodia patch we'd marked earlier. A decent haul for a scouting trip. Coming down, we passed through the farmland where Lixian's wife and eldest daughter, Danny, were working in their newly assigned 10-acre watermelon field. Lixian's wife, a mute woman named Lu Yuji, smiled and gestured that we could take some melon seedlings if we wanted. I declined politely, saying we planned to plant trees this year. Danny ran over with a bundle of wild greens for us. She was a quiet girl with freckles and a bright smile, also mute like her mother. Susu held her hands warmly and told her to come visit. Danny wrote 2 characters on Susu's palm, and whatever she asked made Susu beam and reassure her that we were both doing well. Walking home, I told Susu that Lixian's wife and daughter couldn't handle 10 acres of watermelon vines alone. Trimming the shoots was backbreaking, detailed work. I suggested she help them when she had time. Susu agreed, but said the mother and daughter were proud people who hated being pitted. We'd need a natural excuse to offer help. I said I'd talk to Lixian. He told me his second daughter and her husband were coming this weekend to help, and Leonie would be home from school too. They'd manage. He didn't want charity, but he pressed 2 big fresh fish into my hands as thanks for the vegetable deliveries, and I knew better than to refuse. That evening we ate wild herb dumplings and dumpling broth. Then I sat under the lamp, helping Susu weave a new bamboo basket for tomorrow's mountain trip. I'd used up all our old baskets storing grotto vegetables and needed a replacement. We went up the mountain the next day and came back loaded with herbs and bamboo shoots. But when we got home, something had happened that made me furious. We came home to a yard full of bloody feathers. One hen was gone, the rooster was missing, and over 10 chicks had been killed. The survivors huddled in the corner of the coop, shaking. Susu counted everything twice, her eyes turning red with anger and sadness. We'd kept those chickens through winter, too attached to eat them ourselves, and now weasels had slaughtered them. I was furious. The same weasels had hit Dongmei's house, then Granny Wang's, and now ours. They'd come while both of us and the dogs were up the mountain all morning. A perfect opening. I suspected the weasels had noticed something special about our chickens. I'd been feeding them grotto-grown peanut vines and spinach for weeks, making them tastier than any normal chicken. The weasels had killed and left the bodies at other houses, but at ours they'd actually eaten. They could tell the difference. I bought rat poison and fresh meat from the village shop. I soaked the meat in grotto water to make it irresistible, then laced each piece with poison. Some I placed on the walls around the coop, others I hung from nearby tree branches on strings. The dogs went crazy trying to get at the meat, so I shooed them away. I moved the surviving chicks into a basket inside the house and covered the remaining hen's coop with wire mesh. Susu worried the setup was too simple for clever weasels. I told her to trust me. The grotto-soaked meat was bait no animal could resist. I canceled my trip to the county. I wasn't leaving until those weasels were dead. I spent the morning laying out herb trays to dry in the yard. Then Leonie arrived with two friends, little Cece and a boy called Shaosen. They carried glass bottles full of golden beetles they'd caught in the fields to feed our chickens. Beetle protein helped hens lay more eggs. I thanked them, but explained the weasel attack had wiped out most of our flock. The kids' faces went pale at the mention of weasels. They'd all grown up hearing ghost stories about the yellow immortal and its vengeful curse. I told them weasels were just animals, useful ones actually since they ate rats. The real reason people feared them was their vindictive nature. But as long as you had dogs at home, weasels usually stayed away. The kids launched into weasel ghost stories, how a man in the next village ate a weasel, sold its skin at market, and died at his front door with his belly swollen like a ball. They said the weasel's spirit had eaten him from the inside out. Little Cece turned white with fear, but couldn't stop listening. Susu came to the rescue with the truth. She'd heard about the same man. He didn't die from a weasel curse. He died from gorging on raw wheat stolen from someone's field. It was right after a famine, and people were so desperate they ate anything. He'd eaten the weasel for the same reason, pure hunger. The kids listened with big eyes, not fully understanding what famine meant, but trusting Susu's version. I added that the same man had once tried to be a nameless hero. During a campaign to encourage good deeds, he'd gotten so excited he went out at 3 in the morning and pulled all the unripe corn off someone's 3-acre field, thinking he was helping. The farmer beat him half to death. Leonie piped up saying he knew about nameless heroes. Lei Feng. There's even a holiday on the calendar. Susu looked confused and said she didn't know of any Lei Feng holiday on the calendar. I started laughing. What Leonie had seen on the calendar was Frost Descent, a seasonal marker. The kid had just started school and couldn't read characters properly yet. Susu laughed so hard tears streamed down her face. Then we heard a voice outside. Selling chicks. Trade a hen for 13 chicks. An old man from nearby Peachtree Gully came through with 2 flat baskets on a shoulder pole, packed with fluffy yellow and black chicks chirping away. The weasels had wiped out most of our flock, so this was perfect timing. I picked 20 chicks at 2 mao each. The old man looked at Susu and me together and smiled, saying it was nice to see a young husband who spoke kindly to his wife. She was a lucky woman. Susu blushed furiously and stammered that the children around us weren't ours. We hadn't had kids yet. The old chick seller overheard me mention the weasel problem, and his face lit up. A whole village needing replacement chickens meant a windfall for him. He hurried off to Granny Wong's house with his baskets. I also noticed something funny. The old man had read one of my family planning slogans on a wall and cursed whoever wrote, "Such a vicious thing." I kept a straight face and told him not to worry. Those slogans were just talk. Susu covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. We put the new chicks in the indoor basket for safety. I spent the afternoon waiting for the weasels, but they didn't show. Maybe they were still full from this morning's raid. Or maybe having people and dogs home kept them away. I used the downtime to clean out the back courtyard and plan renovations. After the flood, I wanted to knock down the crumbling wall between front and backyards and rebuild the whole thing as one big compound. Plenty of room for animals and storage. That night, the moon was bright. Susu and I had just bathed and were about to sleep when every dog in the neighborhood erupted in frantic barking. Haiwa and Xiaojin joined the chorus from our yard. I dressed fast and told Susu to stay inside with the lights off. Any light could scare the weasels away. My night vision was sharp enough now that I didn't need a flashlight. I crouched under the eaves with both dogs beside me. whispering for them to stay quiet and still. Half an hour passed. Nothing. I was starting to doze off when both dogs stiffened. Haiwa stared at the east wall. Xiaojin stared at the front gate. Two different directions. They were coming from both sides at once. I looked east and saw a yellow shape creeping along the top of the wall, head swiveling cautiously. At the same time, a second weasel slipped through the gate and hugged the wall, darting toward the chicken coop. These two had actually grown bigger since I last saw them, fattened up on my grotto-fed chickens. They'd tasted something extraordinary and come back for more, bold enough to attack in broad daylight, and again at night. They were addicted. From the wall, the first weasel chittered to its partner on the ground. Then it sniffed its way to the poisoned meat on the wall and gobbled every piece. But the ground weasel didn't touch any meat at all. It just circled the chicken coop obsessively, trying to find a way through the wire mesh. That one was smart. It sensed something wrong with the bait. Moments later, the wall weasel ate the hanging meat from the tree too, then crashed to the ground, convulsing. The poison was working fast. Its partner ran over, sniffed it, and then did something that shocked me. It looked directly at where I was hiding in the dark shadows. It had spotted me. I released the dogs. They shot forward like two little tornadoes. The smart weasel shrieked, grabbed its dying companion in its jaws, and bolted. Up the chicken coop, along the wall, impossibly fast, even carrying dead weight. My dogs chased it onto the coop roof, but the poisoned weasel slipped from its mouth and fell. The healthy one escaped over the wall, while the dogs barked furiously below. I picked up the half-dead weasel. From the wall top, its partner screamed and paced, refusing to leave. Loyal, I had to admit. I held up the dying weasel and told it I'd be waiting for its next visit. In bed, I told Susu I'd rig up an electric wire trap tomorrow, a crude device villagers use to electrocute rats. String thin wires low along walls and surfaces, connect to power, and anything that touches them gets shocked dead. More reliable than poison against something this clever. But the weasel didn't wait for tomorrow. Hours later, the dogs woke us again. I went outside and found the poisoned weasel, which I'd hung from the eaves, was somehow alive and struggling. The grotto water in the meat must have counteracted the rat poison. Then I spotted the smart weasel back on the wall. What happened next left me speechless. The healthy weasel jumped down into my yard, right in front of me. Instead of running, it threw itself on the ground, rolling and wailing as if it were poisoned too. Then it got up and deliberately ran at the dogs, baring its teeth, provoking them. It was offering itself, trading its life for its companions. Haiwa pounced and bit the weasel hard, drawing blood. But the weasel didn't fight back or run. It just lay there, bleeding, staring at me with unmistakable sadness in its little black eyes, glancing at the companion I held in my hand. It was offering its life for the other one. A trade. I was stunned. In 2 lifetimes, I'd never seen an animal do anything like this. These weasels had eaten my grotto-fed chickens and clearly gained some level of intelligence from it. Not as sharp as my dogs, but real awareness. I put both weasels in a rabbit cage, planning to have them skinned for the fur market tomorrow. But minutes later, I heard noise again. The injured weasel had escaped the cage. It sat in front of my dogs holding a bird's egg in its mouth, which it placed at my feet. When I didn't pick it up, it ran off and came back with a newborn pink mouse, still hairless and blind. It set that down too and sat watching me, waiting to see if its offering was enough to buy back its partner. I stood there in the moonlight, looking at this beaten, bloody little creature trying desperately to ransom its companion with whatever it could find. Something in my chest gave way. I sighed and told it to stop. I opened the cage. Its partner shot out, and they both fled over the wall. At the top, the smart one paused and called softly toward me, something like gratitude, before they vanished into the dark. The next morning, I found something at my door. A milky white pearl, smooth and warm as jade, the size of a pigeon egg. On the east wall, 2 yellow heads peeked over, chirped twice, and disappeared. The weasel had brought a thank you gift. Whether it knew the pearl's value or thought it was just a fancy egg, I couldn't say. But if it was real jade, it was worth far more than the chickens they'd eaten. I pocketed the pearl and rode to the county to sell herbs at the old medicine shop on East Street. Got a fair price. Then I went to the forestry seed station and ordered 1,200 fruit tree saplings. Pear, apricot, and crabapple, all drought and flood resistant. They'd deliver 500 tomorrow and the rest through the week. Leaving the seat station, I heard someone call my name. It was Chin Xiaomei, standing by the road in her sharp suit, holding a manila folder. She was in town for a county meeting. My slogans had won their township first place in the regional family planning campaign, and the county had publicly praised their work. She was practically glowing as she thanked me, her eyes bright, her attitude completely transformed from the cold woman who'd once dumped water on my head. She told me the township leadership was impressed and wanted to offer me a position, helping out at the cultural broadcasting station, writing scripts, doing announcements. It was basically a part-time government role with lots of free time. A real opportunity that many people would kill for. I turned it down flat. I made excuses about being lazy and bad with people, but the truth was simple. With the grotto, I had no interest in working for the government at any level. My life was exactly where I wanted it to be. Xiaomei was clearly disappointed and confused. She'd been watching me from Dongmei's house these past weeks, heard Susu and me laughing together, seen us going out arm in arm. She'd started to think the village gossip about me was wrong. My refusal didn't make sense to her. Before things got awkward, a short-haired young woman came running over from the county middle school across the street, arms full of books. She was a teacher friend of Xiaomei's, and without thinking, she started listing the novels she'd confiscated from students to lend to Xiaomei. Martial arts stories, literary fiction, and 2 romance novels by the famous author Qiong Yao. She even reminded Xiaomei to return another romance she'd borrowed last time. Xiaomei's face went from pale to bright crimson in about 2 seconds. Being exposed as a secret romance novel reader, in front of a man, no less, was apparently mortifying for a proper government official in 1995. She grabbed her friend's arm and practically fled down the street without saying goodbye. I watched her go, more amused than anything. It reminded me of my own student days. Then I thought, Susu had nothing to do at home for entertainment. No television, no radio worth listening to. Maybe I should buy her some novels. And a couple for myself too. Without TV, the evenings were genuinely boring. I also still needed to get that white pearl appraised. So I pedaled into the center of town, planning to find a bookshop and a jeweler. I took the white pearl to a jeweler in town. It was genuine mutton fat jade, but just a loose bead without any gold or silver setting. It was only worth about 80 yuan. In this era, top-quality jade sold for 6 yuan per gram, a fraction of what it would be worth decades later. I decided to keep it and wait. At a newsstand, I picked up a few novels, some for Susu, some for myself. Without television, evenings were painfully boring. Then an oil press owner I'd sold to before flagged me down and begged for 2,000 more jean of peanuts at the higher price of 110 per jean. No argument. I agreed to deliver in a couple of days, since tomorrow I had to receive the first shipment of fruit tree saplings. But this encounter made me realize something important. I couldn't keep showing up with thousands of jean of peanuts on a donkey cart, claiming they came from a greenhouse nobody had ever seen. Sooner or later, someone curious would start asking questions. And with greenhouses being the hot new thing everyone was talking about, my story wouldn't hold up to real scrutiny. The solution was simple: rent a shop. A storefront would act as a middleman. I could say I was buying from various greenhouse growers or importing from the city. Nobody would dig deeper if there was an actual shop involved. I spent the afternoon searching and found a perfect spot near the county middle school. A 2-story house with a small courtyard, already set up with a street-facing room on the ground floor that could work as a store without any renovation. The owners were a retired couple whose children worked elsewhere. Rent was a bit high, but I signed the lease immediately. The shop wouldn't need daily attention, just a visit once or twice a month to put out produce and maintain appearances. More importantly, it gave me a cover story for Susu about where the money was coming from. I'd tell her I was running a small business with a friend from my county days. Riding home in gathering rain, I heard frantic shouting from the direction of Erju's greenhouse site. Something about the newly built frames collapsing in the storm. I glanced that way, smiled to myself, and pedaled quietly into the village. It rained most of the night. By morning, thick fog blanketed the entire valley. Couldn't see 5 steps ahead. I borrowed a flatbed cart from Li Xian's house to haul the fruit tree saplings when they arrived that afternoon. On the way back, I ran into the crowd heading to Erju's greenhouse site. Last night's rain had knocked down the frames they'd just put up, and now everything had to be redone. Erju was on the village loudspeaker promising extra pay. Everyone rushed out despite the fog. I spotted old Sangue in the group and called out to him about the cattle cart. He remembered hearing about my white calf from Cece. He said he'd have the cart built by this Sunday. No fuss, just tell him the size. I asked for something on the larger side and left the rest to his expertise. The fog refused to lift. By noon it had barely thinned. I figured the tree delivery might be delayed, so I used the time to clean the back courtyard, scrub out some large water crocks, fill them, and stock them with fish from the grotto. Medium-sized ones perfect for the stew Susu loved. I also checked on the turtle eggs in the grotto. 22 of them, laid shortly after the males arrived. Inside the grotto, I spent the whole morning tidying the vegetable garden. The tomato and eggplant plants had grown into small trees, branches sagging under the weight of fruit. I strung iron wire between trees for the climbing vegetables and propped up the heavy branches with sticks and stones. Much neater now. Coming back outside, the fog was still dense. Then 2 yellow shapes dropped from the tree by the gate. The weasels were back, but not to steal this time. The thin, smart one carried a strange green-gray egg in its mouth, set it gently at my feet, and chirped once. The fat one, the one I'd nearly killed, hung back behind its partner, peeking at me nervously. Before they could run off, I stopped them. I scooped some grotto water into a ladle and set it in front of them. The thin one smelled it, eyes going wide with excitement, then called to its partner. They both drank greedily. Within moments they were buzzing with energy, racing circles around me, weaving between my legs, licking my hands, pure joy and gratitude. Even the timid fat one lost its fear completely. They both stood up on their hind legs, did a little dance, then bounded over the wall and vanished into the fog. Watching them go, I frowned slightly. That fat weasel had looked unusually round and heavy. A sudden thought hit me. Was it pregnant? If so, everything made sense. Why the thin one had been so desperate to save it, willing to die for it, bringing gifts to ransom its mate and unborn babies. The fog lasted all day. The tree delivery didn't come, so I took the opportunity to plant several more acres of peanuts and vegetables on the wasteland while nobody could see me through the thick white blanket. By evening, I'd added 7,000 gene of peanuts and bundles of vegetables to the grotto stores. On the way home, I found my dogs and a pack of village mutts surrounding a fat flower snake by the village pond. Haiwa and Xiaojin showed off for me. They killed the snake in 2 quick strikes and dragged it to my feet. Susu skinned it expertly that evening, saved the gallbladder and skin, and I made a big pot of snake soup with wild yellow essence from the grotto. We ate every drop. The next day was beautiful. Clear blue sky, warm sun. I lay in a deck chair reading a martial arts novel while Susu sewed new spring clothes beside me, glancing over at me with a soft smile. A perfect morning until the village loudspeaker announced the tree saplings had arrived at the reservoir dam. I drove the ox cart up and loaded 500 saplings, plus 20 bonus fig trees the nursery sent as an apology for yesterday's delay. After the delivery boys left, Li Xian appeared with a crew hauling baskets of fish and river clams from the reservoir, lunch supplies for Erju's work crew. Erju was too cheap to buy proper food, so he sent workers to net fish from the reservoir every day. Li Xian mentioned the reservoir was overrun with crayfish. Some outsider had released them a couple of years back during a survey, and now they'd multiplied out of control, eating fish eggs and shrinking the fish population. When I asked why nobody ate the crayfish, Li Xian made a face and said they tasted bitter. I almost laughed. In a few years, crayfish would become one of the most popular foods in the country. But in 1995, out here, people had no idea how to cook them properly. A 1,000-acre reservoir full of crayfish that nobody wanted. I filed that away for later. Li Xian laughed when I promised to cook crayfish for him someday. The reason nobody here ate them was simple. People in these mountains barely used cooking oil. 2 gene of oil stretched 3 months. Most meals were pickled vegetables. Nobody was about to waste precious oil deep-frying crayfish. And without proper seasoning and oil, crayfish do taste bitter and muddy. In a few years, the whole country would go crazy for spicy crayfish. But right now, a 1,000-acre reservoir full of them was considered a nuisance. Walking back with the group, something interesting happened. 2 young men who'd had grudges against me from our factory days years ago started hovering at the edge of our conversation, speaking louder, trying to join in. They were too embarrassed to talk to me directly after all this time, but clearly wanted to reconnect. I said a couple of words to them, and the dam broke. They came right over, calling me Fugué, like old friends, joking about the old days, turning our past conflicts into funny stories. The others joined in too. Just like that, years of bad blood evaporated. Then Urju showed up on his motorcycle. His eyes widened seeing me at the center of a laughing group of men who worked for him. He asked what I was doing. I told him I was planting fruit trees. Chinzei, one of the guys I'd just reconciled with, jumped in eagerly to back me up, explaining about the tree delivery. Urju couldn't help himself. He smirked and said I was wasting my money, that I'd lose my shirt on a worthless piece of land. That's when things turned delicious. The guys started talking, one after another, about how the wasteland was recovering, grass growing, old trees sprouting new leaves. Then someone mentioned, in a casual tone, how villagers used to gossip that Urju had tricked me into swapping good land for garbage, but clearly that couldn't be true since the land was improving. Another added that Urju obviously knew the soil was getting better when he made the deal. He wasn't the type to cheat a fellow villager, right? Every word was a knife wrapped in cotton. Urju's face burned red. He forced a smile and nodded along, but I could see him dying inside. These were his own workers, standing right there, casually exposing what he'd done, framed as praise, but everyone could hear the real meaning underneath. I said nothing, just smiled, waved goodbye, and drove my ox cart toward the fields. Behind me, Urju was left wondering how the village fool had suddenly gained so many allies, and why his own carefully buried secrets were floating to the surface. That afternoon, I planted all 500 saplings. While I worked, the white calf suddenly spooked and ran behind me, staring toward the graveyard. I saw something gray and dog-sized flash through the bushes and vanish. I searched, but found only a large burrow near a tombstone with coarse gray fur around the entrance. Whatever it was, it had scared the calf badly. Not a rabbit, something bigger. Walking home, Fifth Uncle flagged me down from his field where he was thinning overcrowded rapeseed sprouts. He forced 2 big bundles of the pulled seedlings on me. I'd cook them up. Rapeseed greens made a decent dish, especially as a cold salad with garlic and vinegar, a trick I'd learned from a college friend in my other life. At home, Susu was waiting. She watched me for a long moment, then asked me, almost pleading, to slow down spending after the trees were planted. I understood immediately. Between the plow, the cow, the fruit trees, and various supplies, I'd been burning through cash at a pace that terrified her. She didn't know about my peanut sales or the rented shop. From her view, our savings were vanishing with no income to replace them, and fruit trees wouldn't bear for 2 years. I agreed without argument. She was right to worry. I just couldn't explain the truth yet. Once the shop was running, I'd gradually let her in on where the money was coming from. The following Sunday, I drove to the county to deliver 4,000 jean of peanuts to 2 oil presses. Another 4,000 yuan in my pocket. After a quick lunch, I was heading toward my rented shop when a booming voice called my name. It was Han Chuang, a huge guy, 6'3", dark-skinned and muscular. He was an old buddy from my arcade and video parlor days, standing by a noodle stall slurping from a giant bowl. He nearly dropped it running over to me. He stuttered when excited, stumbling over words as he asked where I'd been for 2 months and why I was driving an ox cart. He wanted me to go play Street Fighter at the Workers' Cultural Palace. I told him I had business to take care of, but offered him a ride south since I was heading that way. After years of immersive online games in my other life, coin-operated arcade machines held zero appeal. Maybe someday for nostalgia's sake, but not today. Han Chuang whined about everyone abandoning him. Me, and our other friend Shermeng, who'd completely disappeared since New Year. Shermeng was an older guy, maybe 7 or 8 years senior, who'd had a promising career in the county power bureau before something went wrong. He lost his job, his parents were affected, and he ended up a street loafer hanging out with us in arcades. Now nobody could find him. His house was always locked. Neighbors hadn't seen him in weeks. Chuang had good news, though. His family had arranged a marriage for him. A girl from our old high school, the daughter of a dean. She'd gotten a college degree and worked at the agricultural bureau now. His father had bought him a brand new Mingxing 50 motorcycle as a wedding vehicle. He insisted I try riding it. I took it for a spin around the block, handling it smoothly from muscle memory of my other life. Chuang was amazed that a first-timer rode so naturally. When we parted at the workers' palace, he offered me a job at his family's canning factory if the quarry thing never worked out. I thanked him, but said I was content farming. He clearly didn't believe me, but walked off shaking his head. I was touched. Amid all my old worthless friendships, here was someone who actually cared. At my rented shop, I spent the afternoon cleaning everything and making the empty courtyard feel alive. I planted a fig tree sapling from the grotto by the well. There was a square stone pool the landlords had filled with dirt for a garden. I dug it all out, restored the pool, planted lotus, filled it with water and grotto fish fry. A few buckets of grotto water, and the lily pads spread across the surface in minutes. The dead little courtyard suddenly looked fresh and inviting. I went into the grotto to fetch vegetables for the shop's first display. But stepping into the thatched cottage, my foot came down on something that cracked under my weight. I looked down. It was half of a white eggshell, crushed to pieces. Inside the grotto cottage, I found the basket of duck eggs I'd forgotten about, all hatched. The shells were broken open and empty. Over a month in the grotto's magical environment, unfertilized eggs had somehow incubated and produced chicks on their own. I found the ducklings huddled together in a tree hollow outside the cottage, fuzzy yellow balls with their eyes half shut. They'd been nibbling on my herb plants. I couldn't keep ducks in the grotto. They'd destroy the garden, and if they tried swimming in the ponds, the increasingly aggressive fish and growing turtles would eat them alive. Everything in the grotto was getting fiercer and wilder by the day. So I wrapped the ducklings in my jacket, put them in a basket, and brought them outside. At the rented shop, I realized I had no sign. I went across the street to the county middle school to borrow a small blackboard and chalk. The weekend security guard turned out to be my old high school math teacher, Mr. Leong, now retired and working as a janitor. He recognized me instantly, partly because I'd been a striking-looking student with spectacularly lopsided grades, 90-something in Chinese, single digits in math. He also remembered me leading raids on the new school's construction site to steal rebar and sell it for spending money. I gave him a bundle of green beans, and he reluctantly lent me the blackboard, warning me to stay on the straight path. Back at the shop, I wrote, "Greenhouse vegetables," on the blackboard and set out 4 kinds of produce. Within 3 hours, everything sold out, 1,600 yuan. The location was perfect, near the county hospital, government housing, and teacher apartments. People with steady incomes who could afford 2 yuan vegetables. Combined with the peanut deliveries that morning, I'd made 6,000 yuan in one day. I figured coming once a month would be enough to maintain the cover story. Packing up, I ran into our village Dr. Chun groping outside the county hospital. The old man had been stuck in meetings all day. The county had been selected as a pilot for medical reform, something about rotating village doctors between clinics to help rural patients. He was exhausted and dreading the dark walk home. I offered him a ride on my ox cart. Guoping climbed onto the ox cart and immediately noticed my basket of ducklings, scolding me for keeping the lid closed. He thought I'd suffocate them. I just smiled. He didn't know I'd fed them grotto water. They were fine. He pulled the basket into his lap to watch over them himself, convinced I was still hopeless at practical things. On the road, a convoy of liberation trucks rumbled past. Guoping told me they were from the City Power Bureau, heading to install high-voltage lines in the townships. Our village would be next. That meant cheaper electricity. Right now we were paying over 2 yuan per kilowatt hour, absurdly expensive for a poor mountain area. He also complained about a new medical reform pilot program. The county wanted village doctors from neighboring areas to rotate between clinics, sharing patients. Good idea on paper, but in practice it meant 3 doctors in one room, pushing work onto each other. He was upset about losing his daily 10 yuan wages at Erju's site. We got home after dark. Susu was waiting at the gate with the dogs, looking worried. I'd said I was just going to town for a quick trip, and now it was pitch black. I explained about running into an old friend and giving Guoping a ride. I showed her the ducklings and said I'd bought them in town. She let them out into the yard without questions, but when we were alone, she gently took my arm and asked me to come home earlier in the future. I could feel what was underneath her words. She was afraid the old pattern was returning. Me disappearing into the county all day, coming back late, spending money with nothing to show for it. I couldn't tell her about the shop yet, so I promised to go up the mountain soon to gather herbs we could sell and to finish drying the ones we'd already collected. That reassured her. What mattered wasn't the specific plan, it was hearing me think about our livelihood and show I cared about making it work. After dinner, Leonie and Cece showed up at the gate carrying a kerosene lamp. The boy had a mysterious grin on his face, hands behind his back. "Guess what I brought you, Uncle Fugue?" I guessed beetles. He shook his head and pulled out a cardboard box with a dramatic flourish. "Quail." I caught quail. I peeked inside the box. 5 or 6 baby quail with black and yellow stripes and shiny little eyes. Leonie had raided a nest in the wheat straw stacks outside the village. Cece shyly handed me her box too, a litter of tiny, still-blind baby rabbits from the same straw pile. Spring was breeding season, and those old straw stacks attracted all kinds of wildlife: quail, rabbits, hedgehogs, even pheasants. The kids had gone to see a movie being shown at the village school, a big event since we had no television signal. But Leonie arrived too late for a good spot. Every rooftop, wall, and tree branch was already claimed. His father stood on a stool holding him up, and he still couldn't see the screen. So they'd given up, roasted a snake by the pond, and gone animal catching instead. Cece passed along a message from her grandfather. The ox cart would be ready tomorrow night instead of tonight, since Sangoe wanted to watch the movie too. Leonie begged me to keep the baby rabbits. His father said rabbits that young, once touched by human hands, couldn't survive. But Leonie pointed at Haiwa and Xiaojin. I'd raised them from newborns, and they'd turn out great, so surely I could save baby rabbits too. Hard to argue with that logic. I put the quail in with the ducklings and set the rabbits in the dog's old sleeping basket. The next several days were peaceful. I read novels in the sun, walked the calf in the fields, went herb hunting with Susu in the mountains. No trips to town, no spending, just the quiet life she'd asked for. Then one morning while feeding the chickens, I noticed the egg count was way off. 2 hens should have produced 10 or more eggs in 2 days. I found only 2 or 3. Something was stealing them. Not the weasels. They'd learned their lesson and stayed away from the coop. Not a human thief either, since nothing else was missing. I searched outside the yard walls and found 2 empty shells with small holes punched through them. Susu saw them, and her face changed. She thought it might be magpies. She'd been seeing them land in our yard lately. Susu was right about the magpies. That same morning, while we were outside selling feathers and snake skins to a traveling collector, 2 magpies swooped into the yard. I heard something in the chicken coop and caught them red-handed. One had pecked a hole in an egg, slurped out some yolk, and was flying off with it to a tree branch. Professional thieves, clearly experienced. The hens didn't even notice. We watched the empty shells drop from the tree, and the 2 magpies perched up top looking smug, chattering triumphantly. I threw a dirt clod at them. Missed. They flew off, then came back minutes later with a whole gang of friends, all lined up on the tune tree outside our wall, screaming their little heads off like they were mocking me. I covered the chicken coop with wire mesh again and went inside. Without access to the eggs, the magpies eventually gave up and left. For lunch, Susu taught me to make flatbread. I was terrible at kneading dough. She had to guide me through every step. We ate the bread with egg drop soup, and it was wonderful. Afterward, I tried to nap in the yard with my novel, but the baby quail and rabbits swarmed my feet, crawling into my pant legs and nuzzling against me. The rabbits had imprinted on me the moment they opened their eyes and now followed me everywhere. I had to trap them under a flat basket just to get some peace. Then Shuning Xiang came by, Guoping's older son, who ran the village's only flour mill. His wife had broken her leg around New Year and wanted something to do at home, so he asked if he could buy some ducklings. I had 40, way too many for our yard. Once they grew up, the mess would be unbearable. I caught 15 for him. He paid with a bag of flour and 5 yuan cash, which I handed to Susu. After that, I wasn't sleepy anymore. We'd been eating too simply the past few days. I grabbed a bamboo basket and a net and headed for the reservoir. Time to catch some crayfish and show everyone what they'd been missing. I waded into the shallow water by the reservoir and filled a whole bamboo basket with crayfish in no time, nearly 30 jin. They were fat and plentiful, the water teeming with them. An old fisherman nearby shook his head and asked why I was bothering with those bitter, useless things. I just smiled. On the way home, little Xiaosen and his gang of toddlers intercepted me, begging me to pick green apricots from the trees on the dam. I warned them not to eat any. Unripe apricots meant a day of stomachaches. One kid blurted out that his grandmother said I was possessed by a ghost. I played along, rolling my eyes and sticking out my tongue. growling that I was a hungry ghost who ate plump little children. They shrieked with laughter. Back home, Susu helped me wash the crayfish. She was skeptical. Everyone said they tasted awful. Then she spotted two tiny bright red creatures clinging to the basin rim among the crayfish. At first she thought they were baby snakes, but on closer look they were eels, blood-red ones. Thin as string, unlike any we'd seen before. Probably some rare variant. They were too small to eat, so I dropped them in a separate water crock in the back courtyard with some grotto water and pondweed. That evening I made spicy crayfish with wild garlic, wild onion, chilies, and star anise. The neighborhood kids each grabbed one and ran home bouncing with joy. Susu and I ate the rest of the huge pot, and she was amazed. Couldn't believe this was the same creature everyone called inedible. I told her that when it came to food and fun, I was a natural genius. She huffed, but couldn't argue. Susu had me try on the new clothes she'd been sewing, a light blue shirt and dark trousers. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The grotto's influence had lightened my skin and filled out my frame. I looked more like a scholar than a farmer. Susu was changing too, her skin glowing, her figure fuller. I decided I needed more sun. Too pale didn't suit a countryman. The quiet days didn't last. Over the next few days, villagers started showing up at our door, not for the crayfish recipe, as I'd expected, but to see the two red eels. The kids had apparently told everyone about them, and the whole village was fascinated by creatures they'd never seen before. The red eels became the biggest sensation the village had seen in years. In a place with no internet, no television, and nothing unusual ever happening, two bright red eels were a genuine marvel. People came daily, men, women, mothers with babies on their hips, old folks, children. They brought worms and bugs to feed the eels and called them lucky omens. Under everyone's watchful eyes and constant feeding, plus the grotto water I'd added at the start, the eels grew astonishingly fast, over 20 centimeters in half a month. But since the whole village had been watching them eat and grow day by day, nobody questioned the speed. They just said red eels were special. I found the whole thing absurd. I'd been carefully hiding every trace of the grotto's magic, and here was something growing unnaturally fast right in my backyard. And nobody batted an eye because they were all part of the process. You couldn't make this up. The constant visitors were getting annoying, though. Even the weasel couple stopped coming by during the day. I was thinking about taking the eels to my county shop and getting rid of them when two unexpected guests showed up. Urju walked through my gate with Sun Yanhong behind him and announced I was about to get rich. I played dumb and asked if the quarry job had finally come through. That shut him up. He hadn't expected me to bring that up again. He snapped that I should forget the quarry since I was too busy planting trees. He wanted Red's sister to see the eels. I led them to the back courtyard. Yanhong got startled by the white calf poking its enormous head through the stable window, but I calmed her down. The calf had grown considerably and developed curved horns. It had also become fiercely protective of our property, wouldn't let anyone take so much as an old strainer from the yard without charging at them. I'd had to lock it in the west wing after it nearly trampled Leonie over a kitchen utensil. At the eel crock, Yanhong's eyes lit up immediately. Even Urju's sour expression softened. She turned to me and made an offer on the spot. 500 yuan per eel, 1,000 total. I shook my head. The moment I'd seen Yanhong's eyes light up at the eels, I knew they were worth far more than she was letting on. Something about these red eels had special meaning or value that I didn't fully understand yet. And since it was Urju and his girlfriend asking, the same people who'd cheated me on the land swap, I wasn't about to make things easy. I told her I couldn't bear to part with them. They were rare, beautiful, and I might never find anything like them again. She immediately raised her offer to 600 per eel. I refused again. She went up to 880 each, for luck, plus a standing offer to place me at either the quarry or her trucking company, any position I wanted. By now, half the village had crowded into my back courtyard. Their eyes were bulging. Nearly 1,800 yuan for 2 eels? You could buy a full-grown ox for that. People stared at the little red creatures in the water crock like they might be made of gold. Fifth uncle was practically vibrating with anxiety. He tried to talk sense into me. 880 was more than enough for half a year's living. Yu Qiang from next door chimed in too, telling me not to be stupid. Even the gossiping women were nudging each other, whispering that I was crazy to refuse. But Juxing, standing behind his father, just smiled calmly and said, Do whatever feels right to you, Fugaway. Whether you sell or not, I've got your back. Nobody's going to take them by force. That was all I needed to hear. Every time Yanhong raised her price so eagerly, it confirmed what I suspected. These eels were worth something far beyond what she was offering. I didn't know exactly what yet, but I wasn't going to hand them over to Urju's people at a fraction of their real value. Not this time.